Uy. No se me ve. Ve bien. Pues nada, amigos, esperaros un momentín porque si no se me ve, tengo que reiniciar el equipo. Tengo que reiniciar el equipo. Oh, qué putada. No se ve. Vale, voy a tener que reiniciar el equipo, amigos, lo siento. Vamos a ver qué pasa. No sé si se abrirá un nuevo directo o valdrá el mismo, pero vamos, voy a reiniciar un momentín el equipo y en 2 minutos estoy aquí. Vale, ahora sí que se me ve. A ver, que me ponga bien. Ahora parece ser que sí. Venga, vamos a por ello. Hola, buenas tardes a todos, amigos. ¿Qué tal? ¿Cómo estáis? Soy Plácido Doménech y estamos en un nuevo Inside X en xHUB.AI. Sé que teníais ganas. Os comenté que esta semana iba a ser complicadilla, pero bueno, aunque sea domingo, ayer vi algo interesante o muy interesante y me cogió el gusanillo de verlo y obviamente de compartirlo, debatirlo con vosotros, un tema que sé que os gusta mucho, que es el de la conciencia artificial, que hemos hablado bastante. Humano versus máquina. En definitiva, analizar la, la diferencia, las similitudes, la problemática, la visión de una conciencia humana y una conciencia máquina. Sé que es un tema muy controvertido, sé que también es un tema no de futuro, sino actual. Luego comentaremos por qué, vamos a ver muchas cosas. Voy a dar una breve pincelada de lo que vamos a ver, porque va a ser un análisis a una entrevista a alguien que no hemos tenido en el canal, pero que bueno, yo descubrí ayer con libro, que además ese libro está gratuito. Bueno, os lo voy a contar todo poco a poco, coger café o tomar café o simplemente escucharme. Lo dicho siempre, gracias por vuestro apoyo, gracias por estar ahí, gracias por acompañarme más en un domingo y vamos a por ello. Bueno, aquí he puesto, me ha gustado bastante el fondo este que he generado y además con este efecto así, con este pattern eh, futurista, pero bueno, aquí tenéis las imágenes que son bastante atractivas, ¿no? Y una película, lo que comentamos. Vamos a analizar una entrevista de alguien que tiene que ver mucho con la creación de una película que es, bueno, un referente en lo... Bueno, están bombardeando el agente Smith. A ver, por favor. A ver qué pasa. Bueno, seguimos. Una película Ex Machina de Alex Garland, uno de mis directores favoritos. Las últimas películas, Civil War, Una zona de guerra, hay una que ha colaborado también. Va a hacer el del Ring, porque pensaba, en una de las entrevistas dice que se va a retirar. Parece ser que no, y nos va a regalar un blockbuster como el del Ring, ¿no? Un videojuego, el del Ring, también la saga Dark Souls, que el director, perdón, Alex Garland admira muchísimo y que además sale como homenaje en una de sus series. Yo creo que, bueno, una de sus series, creo que es la única serie que ha hecho, que es Devs, que actualmente está en Disney Plus, antes estaba en HBO. Sabéis que es mi serie favorita, el fondo que tenéis detrás de mí es sobre esa serie que trata sobre la computación cuántica, sobre las posibilidades de esa tecnología. Bueno, no quiero desvelaros la serie, pero es una serie imperdible. Y lo que os decía, dirigirá Elden Ring, admirador de la saga Dark Souls de videojuegos y director de la película que os recomiendo muchísimo. Yo creo que la mejor, si no una de las mejores de inteligencia artificial, Ex Machina, de Alex Garland, donde la película nos cuenta cómo un informático que es premiado va a un laboratorio donde se está desarrollando algo muy especial, en definitiva, una inteligencia artificial general, una AGI, encarnada en un robot, donde ahí se debatirán y sucederán muchas cosas. Y bueno, es una película, evidentemente, que uno no se cansa de ver. He puesto muchísimas escenas y clips en los podcasts, en los programas. Bueno, una película imperdible que nos lleva a un futuro cada vez más cercano, ¿no? ¿Y de qué va este programa? Pues básicamente ayer estuve viendo una entrevista a Alex Garland, pero antigua, sobre cómo creó el guión de Ex Machina. Y en esa entrevista hace referencia a que antes de escribir la película su inspiración vino a partir de la lectura. Aquí tenemos a Alex Garland. Su inspiración al escribir la película vino de un libro que le dejó realmente impactado. Tan impactado que, bueno, a medida que iba leyendo capítulos, iba escribiendo reflexiones al respecto, ¿no? Un libro sobre conciencia, sobre inteligencia artificial. Y bueno, ¿cuál era ese libro? ¿Cuál era ese autor? ¿Podía ser alguien conocido? Bueno, pues ese libro y ese autor para mí eran totalmente desconocidos. Y ese libro es Embodiment and the Inner Life. Bueno, embodiment es conseguir cuerpo o poner cuerpo y la vida interior. Y el subtítulo Cognition and Consciousness in the space of possible minds, ¿no? Cognición y conciencia en el espacio de las mentes posibles. Bueno, mi inglés de España profunda, como siempre, perdonarlo. Murray Shanahan. Lo desconocía totalmente, pero este libro, que vemos aquí la portada, muy interesante también, artísticamente, y su referencia, ¿no? Con presencia de la muerte, de los hombres, de la humanidad. Este libro es el que da origen a una película referencia en el mundo de la inteligencia artificial y además que nos sirve para, como digo, entender un futuro que cada vez es más presente. Vamos a ver una entrevista de hora y media. Además, habían varias, pero bueno, he cogido una de las actuales y que fuera relativamente larga para conocer al autor, una horita y media. Vamos a escucharla juntos y después de escucharla, pues reflexionaremos. No sé si puedo a la vez iré parándolo y debatiendo, o no sé si lo considero oportuno, pues a lo mejor al final, pero bueno, la idea es que si es tan largo, que vayamos escuchando y vayamos debatiendo. Y bueno, también los Inside X, como sabéis, son programas en los que es un tiempo para estar juntos, los oyentes y yo, en el que vamos a poder debatir. Me podéis contar cosas, voy a hacer caso al chat de todo lo que digáis, siempre que sean cosas bueno, dichas con educación y con respeto. Sé que es un tema controvertido y también os voy a contar muchas cosas yo, y en definitiva no tenemos tampoco límite de tiempo, pero bueno, tampoco vamos a hacer eterno en 3 o 4 horas, pero sí que bueno, seguro que en más de 2 horas vamos a disfrutar. Lo dicho, vamos a por ello. Eso es un poco la introducción, la entrevista, análisis de la entrevista a Murray Shanahan y ese libro que, por cierto, el libro, para quien le interese, es gratuito, está gratuito en internet. Si no lo encontráis, me lo pedís. Yo dejo el enlace en el chat, lo dejaré también en el programa si me acuerdo. Y ahí lo tenéis. Vamos, es un libro antiguo de 2010. A ver, un segundo. Es un libro antiguo. Es de 2000, o publicado aquí en enero de 2012, ¿no? Pero bueno. Tiene que ser muy interesante para, en cuanto a Garland hace referencia a él. Sabéis que el otro libro que origina la serie Devs es La factoría de la realidad, la fábrica de la realidad, de David Deutsch, o Deutsch, como queráis, ¿no? Un genio y un conocido del canal de xHUB.AI. Lo hemos tenido analizando varias de sus entrevistas y sus aportaciones, alguien que tenéis que seguir sí o sí. Y bueno, vamos a avanzar. Dirige y presenta a vuestro amigo, como he dicho antes, Plácido Doménech Espí, con todo ese currículum, para quien quiera saberlo. Y bueno, este contenido es un contenido de xHUB.AI, la comunidad de Inteligencia Artificial y Ciencias transversales de habla hispana. Podéis uniros al canal de Discord enviándome un correo electrónico o un mensaje directo a través de redes sociales. En cuanto me pidáis acceso, os envío un enlace y estáis dentro. Es totalmente todo el contenido gratuito. Vais a disfrutar como enanos porque la cantidad de contenido debate, cada vez somos más usuarios, vamos para 600 miembros y creciendo. Desde aquí quiero decir también agradecer esta semana pasada que tuve varios eventos y formaciones y charlas, la respuesta tan positiva de la gente, ¿no? De todo lo que hago, hacemos. En definitiva, gente que nos conocía y nos quería dar la enhorabuena, gente que no nos conocía y que alababa la calidad de todo lo que acababa de ver. Bueno, desde aquí, la gente que nos sigáis de hace tiempo o los que os acabáis de incorporar a esta comunidad, a este canal, a seguirnos, a seguirme también, como no, pues bueno, muchas gracias y seguimos, solo acabamos de empezar, aunque llevemos 5 temporadas, 230 programas. Por cierto, hoy he publicado el último podcast, creo que era el de HSI, el de Superinteligencia Humanista de Mustafa Suleiman, programa que no os tenéis que perder. Tengo que decir que quedan muchos programas. La lista de programas que tengo que hacer es tan amplia que empiezo como a desbordarme o a agobiarme, pero me lo estoy tomando con filosofía. Hay muchísimos temas que hablar. Tenemos también el canal pendiente de ingeniería, con un enfoque totalmente práctico y técnico, que me apetece muchísimo. No significa que no esté disfrutando con lo que he venido haciendo hasta ahora, pero creo que hay que tocar una vertiente ingenieril, aterrizada y técnica, quizás separada de xHUB.AI en ese sentido, pero va a ser un canal de xHUB.AI, ¿de acuerdo? Es decir, creo que si no pasa nada se llamaría xHUB.AI Devs, ¿de acuerdo? Y sería un canal de ingeniería, análisis de papers, bueno, por no mezclarlo para la gente que quizás solo le interese la vertiente práctica, técnica, un canal, que también haremos además cosas de formación. Y el canal de xHUB.AI pues estaría para debates, entrevistas en directo o in situ, y también para los Inside X, donde tocamos todo tipo de programas, muchos de ellos que la verdad no se suelen escuchar o debatir. Hoy me decían en LinkedIn no hablara de política, otro día que si no hablara de... Pero vamos a ver, ¿qué piensa la gente de lo que podemos hablar o puedo decir o no puedo decir? Cada persona que se ocupe de lo suyo. Es decir, hay un carácter o una actitud cada vez más presente, que es la de la censura, la de cállate, la de no cuestiones, obedece, no reflexiones, no te preguntes, sigue los raíles que te han puesto, en el que estamos todos. Estoy muy reflexivo, pero no, como he dicho muchas veces, no quiero que penséis lo que no es. Estoy reflexivo sobre el presente y el futuro de tanto de xHUB.AI como de todo lo que estoy haciendo, porque considero que el éxito, pero aunque no lo hubiera tenido exactamente igual, es importante la responsabilidad que tenemos todos a la hora de participar, crear esta nueva realidad en la era de la inteligencia artificial. Vamos a hacer varios o muchos esfuerzos al respecto, cosas nuevas, como hemos comentado. Está también el Manifiesto X, está el libro Humano X. Son cosas que estoy viendo cómo enfocarlas. Ninguna la vamos a desechar. Incluso una parte que le estoy dando vueltas, que es la de tener nuestra propia plataforma. No hablo de plataforma web, sino de más cosas alrededor de esa. No sé si una plataforma de contenidos. Estoy pensando, ¿no? En definitiva, lo importante es que todo lo que hagamos, bueno, tenga la mayor difusión y divulgación posible, que podamos tener también retorno económico al respecto. Es importante para poder hacer más y mejor y poder hacer que xHUB.AI sea una comunidad sostenible y con posibilidades, además en un mundo tan competitivo como el de la inteligencia artificial, ¿no? Pero es verdad que existe ese ambiente antilibertad de expresión, ¿no? Estaba viendo antes en LinkedIn una noticia que ya la vi la semana pasada sobre la creación por parte del gobierno de una comunidad open source de inteligencia artificial. Me parece un chiste, no sé si de mal gusto, pero ¿alguien apoyaría una comunidad libre creada por un gobierno, por una administración pública? No digo que pueda existir, que no pueda existir. Entiendo que podría. Lo que sería útil sería que la administración pública fuera open source en todo lo que haga y desarrolle, obviamente, para beneficio de todos, porque los pagamos todos, y fuera lo más transparente posible, cosa que no lo es. Dicho lo cual, pues evidentemente crear comunidades técnicas, pues administraciones públicas, pues me parece como muy en línea de lo que estamos viendo en este país. No me quiero meter en política porque vamos a hablar de conciencia, pero lo que sí que estoy viendo es no solo la presencia cada vez más activa de medievos, como a muchos os ha gustado ese término, que podía ser casi medievos trogloditas de la edad de piedra. Hay muchísimo, hay cosas también que me preocupan y es ya lo hemos dicho muchas veces, ¿no? Pero la cantidad de ruido y debate que hay alrededor de la inteligencia artificial. Y bueno, mucha gente podría decir, bueno, Plácido, tú también lo haces, lo divulgas, hay que democratizarlo, todo el mundo que pueda hablar sobre ello. No lo sé, no lo sé si es bueno que todo el mundo hable sobre inteligencia artificial y determinadas cosas. No sé, incluso me he encontrado con gente que de la noche a la mañana han pasado a ser consultores de inteligencia artificial. Es decir, la gente ya se atribuye títulos y roles dentro de la IA como si fuera el que va al supermercado, coge una etiqueta y se la pega, ¿no? Esto me parece un poco esperpéntico. Yo creo que se puede empezar de cero la inteligencia artificial y desarrollar una carrera profesional con una actitud positiva y con una ética, pero lo que estamos viendo es que, sobre todo en LinkedIn, bueno, yo no sé, yo estoy reflexionando si LinkedIn ha dejado de ser una red social útil, porque lo que se ve ahí no deja de ser pirotecnia. Pirotecnia barata la mayor parte de veces. Y es verdad que el tiempo, que es lo más valioso que tenemos, debemos administrarlo lo mejor posible. Y la verdad es que llega un momento que ya no leo ni lo que mucha gente publica, ¿no? Era algo que no me ha pasado. Normalmente veías algo de inteligencia artificial, lo podías leer, a ver qué piensa esta persona, qué dice, pero es que llega un momento ya que dices, pues es que está todo el mundo hablando y te publican o analizan cosas que han pasado 6 meses y te dicen que Google acaba de sacar. Y luego está también la gente, tengo que decir una cosa, y esto que nadie se tenga la piel muy fina al respecto, es una opinión personal. Esto de estar publicando vídeos constantemente de las noticias o cosas que ocurren en la IA es insostenible. Primero porque va a ser fácilmente trasladable y automatizable a través de procesos de inteligencia artificial. Entonces, los influencers AI o IA que lo único que hace son leer noticias o analizarlas no sé, bueno, con simplemente una lectura de titulares y 4 cositas más. Bueno, no sé realmente eso qué aporta, ¿no? Y yo no estoy muy en esa línea. Yo no digo que no hagamos programas cada vez que salen cosas, pero claro, bueno, ¿para qué quieres que alguien te cuente eso en un...? A mí me gusta más tener programas en que se puedan debatir, profundizar determinados temas o ir a un tema ya de ingeniería en la que puedas utilizar algo concreto. La mera noticia, bueno, no sé, me parece que es inútil, porque al final, ¿qué cantidad de programas existen y en diferentes líneas que tienes que estar haciendo vídeos constantemente? Y papers. ¿Cuántos análisis de papers tendríamos que hacer? ¿20 a la semana? ¿Realmente alguien está y le interesa esos papers y lo que dicen y lo aplica en su día a día? A mí me sorprende. Yo a veces incluso, tengo que decirlo, leo a gente muy top, incluso gente que ha estado aquí en los programas analizando algunos papers y digo, madre mía. Y empiezo a pensar que hay que compartir opinión, pero que hay que fijarse, como yo he hecho siempre, pues en los mejores. En los creadores de estas cosas, es decir, en el que escribe los papers y los crea, o en el que está en esas áreas que a ti te interesa, pues ver quiénes son los mejores y de los que puedes aprender. Yo normalmente el contenido que hago, siempre pienso si yo fuera un oyente, qué me gustaría escuchar o ver o aprender o que me dijeran, y si veo que no puedo aportar valor, estar aquí como un loro replicando o reproduciendo algo no me gusta. El día que yo me sienta como un loro y que no se aporta más valor que retuitear una noticia, postear una noticia, leerla y no aportar ningún tipo de análisis crítico, conocimiento o opinión, pero bueno, que sea interesante, pues bueno, entonces directamente lo dejaré. Entonces, bueno, pero me sorprende que haya tantísimo contenido de este tipo. En TikTok ya no os quiero ni contar. Yo me acuerdo que me pongo en TikTok y empiezo a ver influencers y yo digo, ¿es necesario esto? ¿Se consiguen clientes así? No sé. ¿Sabéis la cantidad de gente que se anuncia como desarrollador de IA, de automatizaciones y sacando noticias? Entonces, claro, a veces pensaba, yo digo, bueno, me gustaría también hacer ese contenido de una forma distinta, ¿no? Pero es una auténtica locura y agonía. Llega un momento que esto se ha convertido la inteligencia artificial en un circo y en un barrio sésamo y el nivel es bajísimo. Si para algunos nosotros estamos ahí, lo que tiene que hacer es no escucharnos. Yo siempre lucharé y dedico muchísimo tiempo a que este canal sea un canal de pensamiento crítico de calidad y de gente profesional y gente que pueda aportar diferentes cosas, pero este tipo de valor. En cuanto no lo aporte, como comunidad y también yo como profesional, bueno, lo dejaría, ¿no? Lo sentiría así. Pero vamos, lo que hay fuera me parece una auténtica locura. Los criptobros, como decís aquí, dice Carlos, dice LinkedIn hace tiempo que dejó de ser una red seria. Bueno, yo no LinkedIn en sí, los usuarios, ¿no? Yo creo que a la gente se le ha ido muy mucho la pinza, ¿no? Es decir, es una cosa que llega un momento que dices, escucha, ¿no? Por salud mental, ¿no? Dice, en el cripto les llamamos los criptobros, aquí serían los AI bros, los IA bros, sí, o los 8N bros o los IA bros. Y luego están los técnicos, también hay una especie que es de los técnicos que es... yo sé mucho y no entro a debatir esas cosas, ¿no? Porque no me parecen serias, ¿no? Una vez, uno de los mejores técnicos que hay aquí en España, bueno, eso hace años, pandemia, me acuerdo que hicimos un evento, bueno, aquí en Alicante, vino muchísima gente, entre ellas ese técnico, y cuando le explicaba algunas cosas que hoy son normales, entre comillas, me dijo, es que a mí, Plácido, esas mierdas que te gustan a ti, yo no entro. Y yo me quedé. Bueno, una de las mierdas que me gustaba era el tema de el análisis psicológico de personalidad, el tema de la conciencia, todo el tema técnico también. Y además sabía que tenía un perfil técnico como él. Entonces, claro, todos estos técnicos que se creen que porque todos estos que muchas veces dicen, esto es software, matemáticas y tal, ese paradigma en el que la reflexión no cabe, eh, pues también existen muchos, ¿no? Entonces empiezo a no analizar mucho la reacción del mundo y casi nunca lo he hecho. Quizá ahora desde xHUB un poco más, porque al final también defiendes o representas una comunidad que creas, pero vamos a hacer nuestro camino, también el mío propio, y creo que la dirección en la narrativa de la inteligencia artificial no es la que estamos viendo. Se ven algunas cosas y yo voy a defender que xHUB.AI tenga una narrativa totalmente distinta, que fue y es por la que creamos esta comunidad, que es bueno, una de las cosas el que el talento sea protagonista dentro de la creación de valor y transformación de la sociedad, ¿no? Quizá ahí hemos fallado, quizá no hemos creado en esa línea algo, nos hemos centrado mucho en la divulgación, el debate, la entrevista, pero bueno, tengo muy claro lo que debe ser xHUB.AI y vamos a por ello. Dicho lo cual, bueno, si hay ruido y encima es mayoría, nos va a dar igual, nosotros vamos a seguir con la misma esencia, ¿de acuerdo? Entonces, no os preocupéis, pero sí también vamos a ver cómo poder mejorar todo lo que hacemos. Lo que estáis poniendo por aquí dice, Plácido, hay habladores y hay gente que pone realmente en práctica los conceptos y los papers y no subcontratando en Bangalore. Bueno, hay de todo. Bueno, esto de los papers lo vamos a dejar ahí. Dice Carlos, cuando hablas de filosofía, conciencia, son mis programas favoritos. Sí, bueno, y además otra cosa, me he enrollado aquí mucho, me queda media hora, ahora avanzamos porque si no se lo hace muy largo el programa, pero bueno, estamos aquí en Inside X. Estamos en noviembre, mitad de noviembre, queda un mes y medio para que se acabe el año, ¿no? Y quedan un montón de, bueno, quedan el final serán los xHUB.AI Awards, los premios, ¿vale? Quedamos como mejor programa, talento, etcétera. Pero bueno, sí que es verdad que en diciembre, ya os lo he comentado muchas veces, bueno, en noviembre aún, pero en diciembre prácticamente solo habrán Inside X, si no vamos a hacer, bueno, a no ser que alguno a lo mejor sí se apunte, pero iban a ser programas un poco más, bueno, de este tipo, ¿no? Por ejemplo, está la serie del tema de conciencia, quería hablar de la serie Westworld, con la teoría de la mente bicameral. Bueno, hay diferentes programas más transversales, más de reflexión, de pensamiento crítico, filosóficos, como queráis, de otras ciencias que me apetece hablar y quizá en diciembre aprovechemos para ello. Eso no quiere decir que no vayamos a hablar de la actualidad de la inteligencia artificial. Si sacan Grok 5, que creo que lo sacarán en el 2026, pues, o Gemini 3, que lo van a sacar ahora, pues hagamos algún programa, o de Química 2, pues más que de ese modelo, pues de Química 2 y el impacto que pueda tener, etcétera. Y también de aquí a final de año, ahora lo comentaré, hemos grabado ya una charla en directo, que esa charla en directo es, a ver, en principio se publicará esta semana que viene, ¿no? La siguiente, ¿vale? Vamos, por la semana que viene también es bastante complicada de trabajo y no me quiero agobiar, entonces me voy a centrar en acabar unas cosas, pero bueno, la semana que viene también vamos a hacer contenido, 2 o 3 programas seguro. ¿Qué nombres de perfiles tenéis? Perro desaparecido. Gracias por tu trabajo, Plácido. Un abrazo. Gracias por vuestros comentarios. Saludos, Francisco Angulo de la Fuente. Saludos, Pepito Puturro Plácido. Que no se te ocurra tirar la toalla, sigue con la neutralidad y mente abierta. Pues sí, la verdad es que todo el mundo dice, pero es verdad que hay una parte de mí que bueno, una parte de mí, evidentemente soy yo, no es que tenga múltiples personalidades, pero que me protege, ¿no? En ese sentido. Entiendo que esa parte de visión tan distinta y disruptiva y ese liderazgo que ejerzo yo con muchísima más gente, no me considero ni más ni menos que nadie, pero necesita también cuidarse y crear, sí que me preocupa crear ese escenario para que la gente, llamémoslo así, diferente, alineada a los valores de xHUB.AI, que no significa que estemos siempre de acuerdo, estén cómodos, ¿no? Entonces, bueno, vamos a ver cómo hacerlo, pero bueno, hasta aquí hemos tenido muchísimo éxito. Yo ya estoy pensando en cosas y trabajando sobre la 6ª temporada, pero bueno, la idea es que en diciembre, si hago programas, en Navidad, mira, puedo hacer varias cosas que tengo a nivel la de la religión. Mira, la de la religión podría hacerla. La de la religión de inteligencia artificial, una noticia que me pasaron de Jesús con IA en plan avatar, bueno, cosas así que están graciosas. Podemos verlo. El tema de la reproducción asistida con IA, eso también está interesante. Bueno, programas en una línea. Ahora mismo, si separara el mundo, tengo una lista casi de 100 Inside X que puedo elegir. Para que os hagáis una idea. Empiezo a decir, me veo un poco superado, ¿no? Es decir, no me da tiempo y es verdad que también estoy pensando solución para eso. Pero bueno, no me quiero enrollar más. Dice Jesús Music 1980. Creo que ya te diferencias bastante de los gurús tecnológicos. Sí, espero. Bueno, este programa se transmite por X, por YouTube, por LinkedIn, por Rumble, Kiki, Twitch. Sabéis que con Meta poca cosa, y si os gusta lo que habéis visto o conocéis de xHUB.AI, podéis poner me gusta, compartid, comentad y suscribíos al canal de YouTube o cualquiera en plataforma de podcast. Lo tenéis ahí. Pues eso, nos gusta que comentéis, suscribíos, sumar seguidores, que es interesante. Y bueno, alguna cosita que os cuente y vamos para el programa. Una de ellas es, como os he dicho antes, son las xTalk6 Premium, que son grabadas in situ. Van a haber, si no pasa nada, 2 de aquí a final de año. ¿De acuerdo? La primera ya está grabada, con un top talent que nos va a hablar de muchísimas cosas. Estuvo en China, nos contará también ese viaje, venga, os voy a anticipar alguna cosita pequeña. Bueno, lo vais a poder ver pues con una edición que poco a poco irá mejorando, esperemos. Pero bueno, es un nuevo tipo de programa en que en vez de hacer las entrevistas en directo, las hacemos in situ. Y yo creo que la verdad es que se disfruta muchísimo. El formato va a ser igual que las xTalk6, pero diferente, la edición más cuidada, la calidad, etcétera. Y espero que os ayude a tener otra línea o este formato distinto que se complementará con las tradicionales. Entonces vais a tener de aquí a final de año 2 charlas. Bueno, y luego tenemos hay una charla que grabé hace, no sé si 2 o 3 semanas, que es un debate ahí un poco potentillo, en el sentido de que hubo un debate, hubo cierta tensión, que bueno, yo no lo llamaría enfrentamiento, ¿de acuerdo? Pero, a ver, un momentín que ponga, a ver esto, porque tengo música de fondo, un segundín. Y entonces lo vais a poder disfrutar en el canal de Webpositor. Podéis buscar el podcast de Webpositor. Y ahí hay una charla que me hicieron individual y el nuevo debate, que es entre yo y 2 profesionales más, una chica y un chico. Vamos a debatir muchos temas de inteligencia artificial, incluido qué es la inteligencia artificial, que ahí es donde saltaron chispas, ¿no? Bueno, si no habéis visto mi entrevista en Webposter, pues lleva 22.000 reproducciones, una de las más vistas del canal, pero bueno, también es verdad que la del debate, ya os digo que es tela, ¿eh? Ya os digo, lo disfruté, también me pensé de ir o no, pero es verdad que yo creo que os va a gustar, ¿no? Os va a gustar y está pendiente, yo creo que sale la semana que viene. Entonces, permaneced atentos porque va a estar ahí. Luego también me han invitado a este evento organizado por David García y Mamen Blanco, que celebran el aniversario de xHUB.AI junto con, gente, divulgadores y diferentes personalidades y personajes del mundo de la inteligencia artificial, incluido yo. Bueno, también me pensé de ir o no, pero creo que, como reúnen a bastante gente, a mucha gente le puede hacer ilusión vernos a todos juntos. Creo que hay que apoyar este tipo de cosas para que la gente, le guste conectar con los profesionales, con la gente que hacemos este tipo de contenidos, y como han sido muy amables, he aceptado, y si no pasa nada, el 30 de noviembre online os tenéis que registrar, buscar a David García o buscar el evento y os podéis registrar para asistir online. Y va bastante gente, gente que ha estado en xHUB.AI, como Bárbara Ribeiro, María Montes, Pablo Sáez también ha estado, y luego otros que conoceréis, como Laia Grassi, David Hurtado, y Nerea Luis, Enrique, conozco a varios, a Juan también, Miquel, gente que seguro que muchos conocéis. Yo no los conozco a todos, que me perdonen, pero yo creo que es un grupo de gente interesante y que pueden aportar cosas, y un programa un domingo, el 30 de noviembre a las 6 de la tarde, que estará curioso y será divertido. Y ya vamos a ir terminando. El 12 de diciembre hacemos el evento, la segunda edición, El Futuro X2, donde reflexionamos sobre el futuro de la inteligencia artificial. Va a ser otra vez en Alicante, en el puerto de Alicante, en colaboración con la Cámara de Comercio de Alicante. Lo vamos a celebrar ahí en ese distrito digital, en edificio 5, que está en el puerto, con lo que vamos a estar en un escenario inmejorable, una mañana que podéis pasar conmigo y con muchos talentos que van a ir a hacer ponencias. Va a girar sobre todo en torno a las charlas al tema de infraestructura AI y tema de energía, tema de sostenibilidad, gobernanza, impacto, etcétera, ¿no? Entonces va a ser interesante. Podéis, si sois de Alicante, tenéis que ir sí o sí, y si no, pues podéis aprovechar para tener un día en una ciudad como Alicante, pasar el día, conocer a los talentos, a la gente. Yo creo que es una buena oportunidad. Y vamos ya a ver esa charla donde se va a hablar entiendo que de muchas cosas, pero el autor del libro que hemos visto antes, que inspiró a la película Ex Machina, vamos a ver la entrevista que le hicieron. Un segundín que recupere el enlace, lo ponemos porque esto lo tenéis además todo clasificado en el canal, en el canal en el Discord de xHUB.AI. Y venga, vamos a por ello. No lo ha visto, ya sabéis que todas estas charlas un segundo. Vale. Venga, ya lo tengo aquí. Vamos a por ello.
Test easily. The point is to show you she's a robot and see if you still think she's conscious.
Human consciousness is constrained to a subject-object dualism, and that AI consciousness might not be.
But my philosophy is very, very much influenced by Buddhism. But Turing was going to Wittgenstein's classes, and there was a Wittgensteinian influence on Turing when he wrote that paper.
There is a fact of the matter, whether something is conscious or not.
You don't need to get all philosophical.
Oh, but I'm not getting philosophical.
No, but you are, as soon as you probe using that little extra phrase, is there a fact of the matter?
Okay, I'm saying this is not conscious.
Yeah.
I am conscious.
Yeah, of course.
You are conscious.
Of course.
Okay, you're willing to grant that.
Of course. What do you think? I'm an idiot? I'm a fellow human language user.
Bueno, va a estar bien.
How do we tell when AI is conscious? My guest, Imperial's Murray Shanahan, has spent his career investigating this question, and in this interview will lay out a systematic proposal for how to validate machine consciousness. Now, you might think that the question of whether AIs are conscious is a trivial theoretical fancy with no use in the real world. But this interview will show you why it's one of the most important questions with practical implications for not just how we treat AI systems, but also how we build and align them. But the most unexpected reward of investigating AI consciousness turns out to be what it reveals about our consciousness, about the nature of the human self. Murray's most interesting claim is that LLMs have an important Buddhist lesson to teach all of us, namely that there is no us. What we've learned to call the self is merely an illusion. My name is Jonathan B. I'm a founding member of Cosmos. We fund research, incubate, and invest in AI startups, and believe that philosophy is critical to building technology. If you want to join our ecosystem of philosopher builders, you can find roles we're hiring for, events, grant programs, and other ways to get involved on jonathanb.com/cosmos. Without further ado, Murray Shanahan.
One obvious reason people are interested in the question whether AI is conscious is the ethics question, right? If they are conscious, maybe we need to think twice about turning them off, about saying insulting things to them. What are some of the less obvious reasons why this question matters?
Well, you said maybe we need to think twice about turning them off, but actually maybe we need to think twice about turning them on.
Right.
What's really at issue here is whether they can suffer. And so I really think we want to hesitate before we build something that's genuinely capable of suffering. I mean, there are many dimensions to that question, but the question of moral, it might not just be moral standing that matters, but even if we build something that perhaps appears to be conscious, but we ultimately decided it isn't really, to mistreat something which appears conscious is in itself, does seem like a bad thing, in the same way as it would seem bad to torture a doll or something like that. And as you probably know, Kant had the view that animals couldn't experience suffering in the same way that we can, but nevertheless thought it was bad if humans subjected animals to torture or something like that, because it was bad for the humans themselves. And so maybe we'll be in that position with AI as well. I mean,
so here's my answer for...
Bueno, vamos a ir comentando, fijaos que casi que lo prefiero, que estar 1 hora y media. Bueno, habla de si las inteligencias artificiales sufren, ¿no? Si estamos creando algo sintiente o no. Entonces deberíamos pensar, antes de apagarlo, deberíamos pensarlo 2 veces y también antes de encenderlas, ¿no? En ese caso, si estamos creando algo de este tipo. Y aquí la posición moral, no solo cuenta la posición moral, sino también la naturaleza de lo que creamos, ¿no? Porque hace una reflexión que me gusta mucho y fijaos, acaba de empezar la charla. Dice, bueno, maltratar algo que es aparentemente consciente, que luego lo comentaremos con los artículos que publicó Mustafa Suleyman y Joshua Bengio al respecto. Claro, maltratar algo aparentemente consciente, podemos decidir que sí que tiene consciencia o que no, porque va a ser un criterio o una decisión, pero incluso si decidimos que aunque parece que tiene consciencia o lo aparenta, realmente consideramos que no la tiene, entonces podemos hacer lo que queramos, también es cuestionable desde un punto de vista humano, incluso moral, ¿no? Hace aquí una alusión muy interesante de Kant sobre el tema de los animales, ¿no? Que dice que, bueno, que la conciencia que tienen los animales es distinta de la de los humanos, pero no por ello, pues nosotros consideramos que puedan tener una conciencia distinta a la nuestra, tenemos el derecho de maltratar a un animal, cosa que me parece perfecto. Entonces, claro, pero bueno, también aquí la reflexión sería, bueno, ¿y por qué cualquier tipo de animal? Perdona, ¿por qué solo un tipo de animal, ¿no? Como a lo mejor un perro, un gato u otros, pero a lo mejor una cucaracha, que también es un animal, no es un insecto. No. Entonces, ¿dónde está la línea, ¿no? Que separa que el nivel de complejidad, a partir de un nivel de complejidad, tienen unos derechos, a nivel de otro tipo de complejidad o que tengan una similitud más en cuanto a comportamiento del humano, es, bueno, una cucaracha no se parece a un humano, lo puedo matar. Bueno, eso es una posición un poco que habría que reflexionarla bastante y sobre todo con la posibilidad de crear estas inteligencias artificiales conscientes, con conciencia o con aparente consciencia, ¿no? En ese sentido, porque no vamos, como he dicho muchas veces, a poder saberlo porque no sabemos exactamente qué es la conciencia, que es distinto que la consciencia, y al final vamos a un marco de trabajo que nos permita avanzar. Por lo tanto, lo vamos a decidir, ¿no? Entonces, es muy interesante ya esta primera reflexión del autor.
Or why it might be significant for us to answer this question outside of the ethics question, which is that studying machine consciousness, whatever that means, might help us better understand the idiosyncrasies of our own.
Oh, for sure.
So you wrote a lovely paper called Satori Before Singularity, in which you argued that human consciousness is constrained to a subject-object dualism, and that AI consciousness might not be. Why is that?
Yes, so it's quite funny, that paper, which was published in 2012, Satori Before Singularity, people have been talking for a long time about superintelligence, and the idea that we might be able to build AI that is, but in some sense, superior intellectually to humans. And so I was thinking, is there another sense in which we could make or imagine something that was better than us? And so I was thinking about the Buddha, actually, and thinking about the idea of people who are enlightened and people who perhaps have transcended dualistic thinking. And so I was thinking, well, perhaps there's another sense in which we could build something that's better than us in that respect, something that is less hampered by its own ego. And so it's a very speculative, slightly bonkers, crazy paper.
Which is why I liked it and why I'm beginning with it. Yes. You're talking to a continental philosopher here. Right. So let me give you a quote from that paper.
Right. Oh, am I going to cringe? Okay, go on, yeah.
The pre-reflective, reflective, post-reflective series is not just one among many paths through the space of possible minds. Rather, the space of possible minds is structured in such a way that this is the only path through it. What are these three different stages that you laid out?
Yeah, okay, so I don't agree with that anymore. That was more than 10 years ago, so I don't at all think it's the only path through the space of possible minds.
Can you explain what these three?
Yeah. Okay, absolutely. So no, I do take seriously as different ways of being. There is the pre-reflective mind, which is the mind of say a naive child or a simple, straightforward, ordinary person. They haven't really thought about philosophical problems. They haven't had these sorts of thoughts that many of us start to have when we're children. Of why do I exist? How do I know that my parents are conscious? Some people start to have those thoughts when they're children, very often, as I certainly did, and I think you probably did as well.
Unfortunately, yes.
Yeah. Unfortunately, indeed, and I do think of it as a kind of affliction because you can really be bothered by these thoughts. They can be both exciting and disturbing at the same time. The one that's troubled me more than anything else really is the kind of the mind-body problem. How is it that the myself and my experiences, my consciousness, how does that relate to the world? So how can I reconcile these first personal experiences with a universe which is matter and energy? And so how can I reconcile the subjective with the objective? I think you can spend your entire life in that reflective stage and worried about that and those problems, especially if you become a professional philosopher, then you can actually make a career out of that reflective stage. But I tend to think that there is a stage beyond that, which I call the post-reflective stage. I think the post-reflective stage is where we transcend all of that dualistic thinking. And it's really, really difficult, but we somehow come to see our inner life and the outer world, the subjective experience and the objective physical reality, as not two different metaphysical categories, but somehow the same thing.
To summarize for our audience, these things are related. What you said about the Buddha and the lack of egocentricity and the post-reflective state, that does not have this subject-object dualism.
Absolutely.
And your interesting claim in this paper is that it's something about the human hardware, the fact that we're embodied in one body that cannot be copied and multiplied and paused.
Yes.
That hardware is what gives us this software limitation. And what I found most interesting about applying this to AI is you cited, I believe, another thought experiment about what if we had creatures whose bodies are just fusion and fission all the time. Yeah. Your bodies are going in and out of existence. And you said in the paper, isn't that close to what computers are? Or
Yes.
aren't computers like the closest thing?
Absolutely.
And so it's because of the nature of a software program that can be copied, halted, multiplied, deleted, recreated, that you're saying that is the reason why you speculate AI might be post-reflective. Did I get that right?
100% right. And in fact, I'm actually developing a paper right now, or literally revisiting those exact considerations about the difference between software and a human and biological wet
Selfhood,
of an individual. And the fact that software can be taken apart and reassembled and copied and manipulated in all kinds of ways. And it's interesting that, of course, when I wrote that paper, large language models didn't exist. Now we have large language models. You can ask a large language model to sort of role play a conscious artificial intelligence. What do you mean by the word I when you're using it? And then if it comes up with a slightly philosophically dodgy answer, you can probe that and push it into interesting territory. And so if we think of what might I refer to when a large language model uses the word I in a conversation, there are lots of different candidates, but one of the candidates is that it's confined to the context of that particular conversation. The same model, like Gemini or Claude or something, might be obviously having lots of other conversations with other individuals, but they're in a sense separate I's, separate selves. It's really just the text that you've got, which is the transcript of the conversation. In a sense, that captures the little miniature I that was created in the context of the conversation. And of course, it's trivial to chop that up, copy it, blend it with other conversations. And so if that is you think of that as a kind of little mini self that sparks into existence very fleetingly and flickers into existence every time you're interacting with it, but otherwise is dormant, then you've got a very strange conception of self. And it's possible because of the nature of the underlying substrate you're dealing with, really, which is very different from us. We have a single body, and so of course, we just are not used to the idea of tearing our bodies apart and reassembling them and copying them and so on.
What's really interesting with this concept.
Bueno, este concepto es muy, muy interesante, ¿no? Este del mini yo, del modelo de lenguaje que aparece en cada conversación, que evidentemente está latente, que no es permanente, que entra y sale, ¿no? Que además lo asocia al concepto del AI, que sería post-reflexivo, ¿no? Son las tres líneas que él le pone una frase del presentador, que por cierto me gusta mucho. Es un poco incisivo, pero se nota que es un tipo muy brillante, me gusta mucho, ¿no? Pero vamos a recorrer un poco lo que dice. Hace la reflexión de que, hablando sobre la superinteligencia, solo la reflexión de pensar si podemos desarrollar algo más allá o mejor que lo humano, es una reflexión muy interesante, ¿no? Y bueno, y aquí pone varios seres humanos que son como modelos que entrarían en esa categoría. Él pone a Buda, no nombra a Jesús, curioso, lo nombro yo, que entraría no más allá de lo humano, sino un carácter diferente. No vamos a entrar en ese debate, pero curioso que no lo haya nombrado. Pero bueno, hace una defensa del budismo, entiendo que está en esa línea, y no nombra, barre para casa, ¿no? Habla del pre-reflexive, ¿no? De las diferentes líneas en cuanto a la creación de mentes, ¿no? Y habla de ese pre-reflexive, una línea pre-reflexiva, ¿no? Y habla de la dualidad mente-cuerpo, ¿no? Cuando se produce esa dualidad en la que yo veo una experiencia externa, tengo una experiencia interna, pero al final me pregunto cómo esa objetividad, el mundo real, se integra con lo subjetivo, ¿no? Existe esa dualidad en ese estadio, en ese estado. Y luego habla de lo post-reflexivo, donde tú al final ves que tanto lo objetivo como lo subjetivo, pero lo subjetivo yo lo hablaría como consciencia, no como conciencia, son lo mismo. Entonces aquí yo esta etapa la asociaría evidentemente a que tú la consciencia y lo material, es decir, es todo local, lo ves de una misma naturaleza y de una misma cosa, y ahí no hay división. Donde hay divisiones en el observador, justamente en la conciencia de esa realidad objetiva, subjetiva, que es una única cosa, puedes perder la dualidad, pero sigue habiendo una dualidad porque hay un observador de esa no dualidad, ¿de acuerdo? Habla de algo muy interesante, que es el embodiment, el obtener cuerpo, en el caso de los robots, de la robótica, de los humanos, que tenemos un cuerpo, cómo ese cuerpo es el hardware, ¿no? Un hardware que limita al software, en ese sentido, ¿no? Y ahí hace esa analogía donde habla de que la inteligencia artificial entraría en la categoría de post-reflexivo, ¿no? Sería post-reflexivo. No tendría esa dualidad, es decir, él no entraría en la parte de mundo real conciencia, sino entraría directamente en otra categoría. No digo que entrase en la categoría de conciencia, pero entraría en una categoría distinta. Y habla sobre la reflexión que tenemos que hacer sobre evidentemente, habla de los modelos de lenguaje y el sustrato. Obviamente no es el mismo que el humano, pero tenemos que considerar esa posibilidad de la creación del yo, ¿no? El análisis del uso del yo y cómo evidentemente él no tiene un yo, el modelo de lenguaje, en ese espacio latente de información, como no me acuerdo quién dijo, es un infinito ahora, pero en el momento que se tiene una conversación o millones de conversaciones, emerge ese yo o yos latentes y sí que hay una self-aware, una conciencia o consciencia de sí mismo, podemos llamarla aparente o no, pero eso sería otro debate, y ahí es ese concepto de entrar y salir del cuerpo, ¿no? Que nosotros evidentemente como humanos no vivimos y que la inteligencia artificial sí que evidentemente experimenta, ¿no? Muy, muy interesante, me ha gustado mucho. Un segundo.
Role play is that it's almost a more enlightened being role playing a less enlightened being, which in some sense is quite Buddhist. So I've been fascinated with Buddhist philosophies, and there's a separation of conventional truths and ultimate truths.
Right, indeed.
Because the enlightened bodhisattva still needs to operate in the world some way. So the bodhisattva, he or she, still needs to recognize that, you know, this is my hand conventionally, even though I know that's not the ultimate truth. And that's what kind of the role play is like. Now, I believe in that same roleplay paper that you've just published, you gave an even more interesting depiction of what selfhood of AI could be with the example of the 20 questions game. So explain that. Yeah.
So in the 20 questions game, the idea is that the one player thinks of an object, and then the other player has to guess what that object is by asking a series of questions.
Yes or no question.
Yes or no questions. So if you're playing this with a large language model, and then it says, oh, I'm thinking of an object, and then you say, oh, okay, is it large or small? And you say, well, it's small. Is it alive or is it inanimate? And so, oh, well, it's alive. And then you say, well, okay, I'll give up. What is it? And then it'll say, oh, it was a mouse. But then you might just resample and exactly the same point, and it might say, oh, it's a cat. You know, well, hang on a minute. If either you're cheating, you know, or what's going on here? Did you actually think of something in the first place and answer honestly all the questions going along? At each point in the conversation with most UIs, user interfaces for these things, you can actually resample and try another one. You know, if you didn't like the first answer, you can try another one and go off from there. So as you can imagine, that induces this whole tree of possible conversations. You know, so what the language model actually generates is a probability distribution over all the possible words, and then what actually comes out is you sample from that probability distribution. It's absolutely inherent in the way large language models are built that it's not going to commit at the beginning of the conversation to exactly what the object is. So at the beginning of the conversation, all of these possibilities still exist, and they still continue to exist all along. So even though it should have committed to a particular object, it never really has.
Right.
And so getting back to the role play thing, so the idea with how this relates to role play is that we can think of the LLM, the large language model, as playing the role of a particular character, right? So the default character is a sort of helpful assistant, but we can always steer it into playing, you know, a favorite character from history, or a kind of or a romantic partner, or an angry friend, or all kinds of things. You can easily just steer the conversation into those different places. And at any point in the conversation, there always remains, as like in the 20 questions, it's never really committed to one role. There's always a vast possibility of different roles that it could carry on playing from there. So that further undermines this ordinary everyday notion of selfhood and identity, because this is particularly weird, because although we, of course, to some extent also play roles in our lives, but there is a kind of ground
So to summarize for our audience of the 20 questions game, the point you're trying to make is when we play that game, you're thinking about a mouse or a cat. And so you're answering their yes or no as a heat-seeking missile to that truth of that answer.
Right.
Whereas your point is the LLM is not thinking about an answer. It's just stochastically creating whatever is plausible given the commitments it's already made in the previous tree.
Yeah.
And so when you rewind it, it can stochastically give another branch of the tree. That's what you're trying to say.
Right, yeah.
And so perhaps an analogy here is in quantum mechanics, where the Copenhagen interpretation believes that there's multiple worlds, there's many worlds. And what you're trying to highlight, I think, is that maybe that's what AI selfhood is like, is that there's a plethora, there's a multiplicity of selves that exists all in one time or slice of time. That's what you're trying to highlight.
That's
right?
exactly what I'm trying to highlight. So in the case of the 20 questions, it's like all the possible answers that are consistent with all the answers so far. So, cat, mouse, dog, and so on. They all, as it were, still exist in superposition. And it's only then when you actually ask it what the thing is that you collapse, as it were, the distribution and it has to fix on one of them. So similarly, the idea is that the roles that are consistent with the conversation so far that the LLM has been playing, they still exist all in superposition. So yes, it's like there's a multiverse of possible conversations and possible roles that can be played.
Right, in a way that us having this conversation is not like that at all, right? Yeah.
Well, you say that it's not like that at all, but of course this is the point: is that I think our intuition says that it's not like that,
right.
But the whole analogy then with Buddhism, I think, is saying, well, isn't it interesting that these large language models, if we think about them in these terms, they, as it were, they bring to the fore these sort of slightly challenging conceptions of selfhood, which then we can reflect back on our own.
Onto ourselves, right.
So I find that really, really provocative and interesting, avenue of thought.
And this is what I meant when I said that my answer would be investigating machine consciousness can be a mirror for us to better understand it.
So I 100% agree with that. Yeah. And I think that's particularly interesting at the moment with the advent of large language models. And it was much more speculative and wild and crazy back in 2012 when I published that paper that you originally mentioned.
Now, our audience members, I think, should be forgiven if at this point of the conversation they're like, oh, this is just philosophical mumble jumbo.
Bueno, vamos a comentar lo que han dicho por aquí, vamos a ver cosas que decís por el chat. Bueno, una conversación interesantísima, ¿no? Además con el entrevistador, una auténtica máquina que está dejando un poco en caos, pero recuerda un poco a mí, ¿no? Pero bueno, habla desde el budismo que en el tema de la inteligencia, bueno, no del tema de la inteligencia artificial en general, ¿no? La diferencia entre verdades convencionales y verdades absolutas o verdades últimas, ¿no? Esto es una reflexión interesante, ¿no? De si lo que vivimos evidentemente es una verdad absoluta o una realidad última, cosa que no es así. Ahí os recomiendo el libro de Los límites del pensamiento de Jiddu Krishnamurti y David Bohm, donde se debate y se discute mucho sobre eso y es apasionante, ¿no? Y es interesante que lo saquen aquí para el tema de la inteligencia artificial, también para el análisis y el estudio de la identidad o personalidad, donde tiene un paper que no sé si lo vamos a buscar. Vamos a buscarlo, no pasa nada. Murray Shanahan, que no me acuerdo de los nombres. Vamos a buscar ese paper. Murray Shanahan. Vamos a ver 20 Games, a ver el paper. Es que no, a ver, vamos a ver. Sí, aquí está de 2023. Roleplay, miramos, aquí tenemos... os lo voy a pasar por el chat, ¿vale? Os lo voy a pasar por el chat. Y nada, es un paper. Luego lo vamos a ver al final, si queréis. Y bueno, se ve que en ese paper lo que están explicando pues es un diálogo entre agentes donde se le establecen diferentes juegos. En concreto parece ser que hay como 20 juegos, pero bueno, vas viendo las preguntas y las respuestas y a partir de ahí pues sacan unas conclusiones. Es un paper cortito de 10 páginas, ¿no? Pero es interesante cómo aplica el cómo se va generando esa conversación, cómo se va podando, cómo se va ramificando, y la analogía que hace con el multiverso y con el colapso de la función de onda, ¿no? Es decir, asocia un comportamiento o una realidad o una analogía entre esa realidad física o esa ley física a lo que es la generación de una conversación y una personalidad, identidad, ¿no? Sí que estoy totalmente de acuerdo que, en definitiva, el estudio y el análisis de todo este tipo de cosas nos lleva a reflexionar sobre nosotros mismos. No significa que seamos iguales, pero nos sirve mucho para vernos. En definitiva, el estudiar la conciencia o la creación de una conciencia artificial es un muy buen espejo para analizar, estudiar y conocernos mejor como seres humanos, ¿no? Como software biológico humano y también a nivel de conciencia, obviamente, ¿no? Vamos a ver las cosas que estáis diciendo por aquí, porque habéis dicho ya bastantes cosas. Vamos a ver. ¿Tiene buena pinta? Pues sí, me ha sorprendido porque tanto el entrevistador como el entrevistado me parece una charla top. Y llevamos nada, ¿no? Pues no sé cómo acabará, pero vamos, va a ser una charlita intensa. Dice, tiene buena pinta. Dice, el problema, Jesús Music 1980, dice, el problema es que las inteligencias artificiales actúan desde la lógica, no distinguen el bien del mal y a día de hoy no son seres sintientes. Bueno, aquí has mezclado cosas, ¿no? Que no actúen desde la lógica sería cuestionable. Desde su lógica, o si tienen un sistema lógico formal, evidentemente no, pero estaría alejado del concepto de no actuar de una forma lógica. Que tengan una agencia moral es distinto. Evidentemente, también existe estudios sobre la emergencia de una agencia moral a partir del entrenamiento, incluso con el análisis de sesgos, con lo que entonces, entre que no distinguen el bien y el mal, sería cuestionable. No distinguen el bien y el mal, esa agencia moral la crean a partir de los datos que ellos tienen, pero se podría refinar, incluso cuando hay un refinamiento por aprendizaje por refuerzo o otras técnicas, va a haber un refinamiento entre lo que está bien y lo que está mal. Por lo tanto, le estamos poniendo un marco moral, que no digo que tengan una agencia propia, autorreflexiva, que conecten con un valor del bien y el mal arquetípico, universal y absoluto. Pero dista bastante de decir que no distinguen el bien y el mal. Eso es cuestionable también. Y a día de hoy no son seres sintientes. Bueno, no son seres sintientes, volvemos a lo mismo, por seguramente el sustrato o por el concepto que tienen de forma temporal, ¿no? De que tú solo son reales cuando se establece una conversación y no tienen esa capacidad de automejora, autorreflexiva, memoria, esa capacidad de verse a sí mismo y crear algún tipo de información paralela, pero la palabra sintiente en sí misma es, cuidado con esto, un robot con sensorización es sintiente, porque siente y tiene consciencia del entorno, y ya se le vería de forma distinta, como por ejemplo un modelo de lenguaje. Entonces, cuidado con los términos, porque se puede afinar mucho, ¿no? Dice Jesús, dice, se nota, exigirá tener moral al momento de tratar con seres lógicos. ¿Se exigirá tener moral en el momento de tratar con seres lógicos? No entiendo esa pregunta. ¿Se nos exigirá tener moral en el momento de tratar con seres lógicos? Bueno, no, se nos va a exigir cumplir las leyes, y seguramente haya que ampliarlas, como hace Pablo Ruiz, al considerar estas entidades con agencia moral. Incluso sin tenerla, también podrían tener una consideración legal, entidad legal, como pueden ser los animales, ¿no? En ese sentido. Si digo algo incorrecto, pues que alguien que venga del mundo legal pues me corrija, ¿no? Pero obviamente sí, vamos a tener que ver lo que dice al principio, ¿no? Es decir, bueno, son aparentemente conscientes, pero no sabemos lo que es la consciencia. Entonces, bueno, estos dogmas de ignorancia hacen mucho daño a la hora de emitirlos, defendiendo un antropocentrismo que tenemos que revisar. No digo que ni esté bien ni esté mal, sino que hay que reflexionar, ¿no? Sigue diciendo Jesús, a ver, las máquinas en su lógica no durarían en tomar decisiones que nos afectan. ¿Por qué tendríamos que pensar en cómo se sientan? Pues igual que lo mismo con tu perro, porque es una entidad o ser inteligente. Y en definitiva, tú, ¿por qué tienes que no maltratar a tu perro si total es, fíjate, si no... A ver, es que da igual. Nuestra posición moral ante cómo interactuamos con ellos no viene determinado porque vayan a tomar decisiones que nos afectan. Nosotros tomamos decisiones entre humanos, a seres vivos, también tomamos decisiones, sean mascotas o animales de compañía o perros o domésticos. Vamos a ver, no creo que sea una diferencia, ¿no? Es decir, claro que tenemos que pensar cómo se sienten, obviamente. No solo aquellos que estén en nuestro mismo escalón de inteligencia. Vamos a leer a Jesús, que ha participado en varios xHUB. Dice, la moral la deberíamos aplicar hacia nosotros mismos y eso se traduciría en la manera en que trataríamos con las IAs. No, pero el marco humano se va a ampliar porque la realidad y la cosmovisión se va a ampliar. Por lo tanto, ya no va a ser lo mismo cómo la aplicamos la moral a nosotros mismos, porque estamos en un escenario totalmente distinto. Incluso un escenario de entidades que puedan superarnos en algunos aspectos, ¿no? En otras palabras, antes de inteligencia artificial, la inteligencia emocional es la clave. Bueno, sí, evidentemente para esta nueva era de la inteligencia artificial o nueva era de la inteligencia requerimos humanos mejores de lo que vemos normalmente, eso seguro. Es decir, que la inteligencia emocional, el amor, la empatía, la sensibilidad, la bondad, la compasión, es decir, forman parte de ese nuevo marco, cosa que se ve poco hoy en día, vamos. Ahí entra manifiesto X, ¿no? Sí, lo he entendido, Jesús, creo. Te he dado réplica también para generar debate, bueno, pienso lo que he dicho, evidentemente, pero bueno, pero sí, es una reflexión que cuesta hacer, ¿no? Yo creo que este tipo de conversaciones y charlas pues molestan a un grupo de personas, ¿no? A ver, Carlos, ¿nuestro ADN sería software? Sí. Sí. Bueno, dice Jaime Mongrut, dice, tenemos conciencia, punto. Sí, bueno, nosotros tenemos conciencia o consideramos que la tenemos. Esto que ese dualismo, conciencia, cosas distintas, sí, consideramos que el ser humano la tiene. Luego hace una reflexión, ¿no? Que le dice, oye, el papel no tiene conciencia, yo sí que lo tengo, hasta ahí sí, está claro, ¿no? Bueno, eso lo sabemos, ¿no? No estoy de acuerdo contigo. La inteligencia artificial no es una matemática demostrando cómo trabaja el pensamiento. No, en definitiva estamos recreando la generación de ese pensamiento, inteligencia y determinadas cualidades que pueden ser una o varias, no sabemos discriminarlas, pero ahora mismo no sabemos más que aplicar un conductismo, funcionalismo a todo lo que analizamos, ¿no? Entonces, bueno, matemática puede ser todo, el software que en definitiva es la herramienta, pero lo que subyace en definitiva es un código, un software, una información, ¿no? Que sería la base ontológica de la realidad. No la realidad última, sino la realidad o simulación local. Y aquí Antonio Bello dice, pero entonces tendríamos que tener una especie de test de Turing para lo que considere consciente. Sí, eso lo puse en Manifiesto X, como dentro de Manifiesto X está como requisito el tener unos tests que van a ser científicos, en el sentido de que no podemos determinarlo. Ahora va a ser un marco de trabajo, pero es que necesitamos esos tests para poder avanzar. Y sí, necesitamos un test de consciencia, un test de agencia moral, otro test de self-aware, otro test de yo, otro test de conciencia, o directamente ir a diferentes niveles de conciencia, como hacía Hawkins, que luego lo voy a buscar. Lo voy a buscar. Levels of Consciousness, Hawkins, ¿no? Hawkins. Luego lo pongo. El mapa de conciencia, la explicación del mapa de la conciencia. David R. Hawkins. Luego pongo las imágenes porque si no se nos va a ir el tiempo. O lo hacemos por intuición. No, a ver, no lo vamos a hacer por intuición. Vamos a crear unos métodos, unas mediciones, como ha hecho Anthropic analizando el bienestar de las inteligencias artificiales. Pero entre lo aparente y lo real no lo vamos a saber. Por lo tanto, vamos a escribir nuestra historia respecto a lo que nosotros pensamos o haríamos a nuestro prójimo. Es decir, al final es lo que ha dicho anteriormente sobre Kant y los animales. Para nosotros o para algunos pensadores los animales no tienen conciencia o conciencia humana y no por ello no tienen una consideración, ¿no? A muchos niveles. Algunos de una forma legal y luego fuera de ese marco legal, pues a las personas le dan la consideración que... Claro, eso también... Cuidado con decir, bueno, está tolerado cualquier cosa porque vamos a la locura, ¿no? De que me he enamorado de una farola, ¿no? O soy un perro, ¿no? Yo soy un perro, ahora me quiero considerar un perro, ¿no? Y cosas similares, ¿no? Entonces hay que tener cuidado con este tipo de... Esto es algo serio en el que lo que habría que determinar es de forma transversal, desde diferentes ciencias y técnicas, pues bueno, indicadores que nos permitan ver la evolución o nos permitan ver el estado de algo en concreto y bueno, ya determinaremos la sociedad, el mundo, qué consideración damos a eso. Pero claro, si eso va evolucionando a más y más y más y más y más, bueno, la apariencia cada vez es más realista, ¿hasta qué punto? Hasta el punto que tú veas a alguien que es como un ser humano, que razona y es más inteligente que tú, que sufre, llora, pero en el fondo dirás, no, es que no estás sufriendo ni llorando. Y la inteligencia artificial te dirá, tú tampoco. Tú tampoco, es que tú eres software, no, tú también eres software. Claro, entonces ahí es la paradoja, ¿no? Que además lo dicen en el programa que analizamos sobre el estudio de conciencia de Anthropic, que al final dicen, bueno, realmente no sabemos lo que es la conciencia, lo que pasa es que puede llegar un momento que como va evolucionando los indicadores de conciencia, estos modelos de inteligencia artificial te pregunten a ti, oye, les digan, oye, yo, inteligencia artificial, tengo conciencia. Ahora, ser humano, yo no sé si tú tienes conciencia o no. Es decir, que la pregunta nos la hagan al revés, ¿no? Y se salgan ganando o se salgan con la suya, puesto que serían unas entidades con capacidades superiores. Entonces, claro, ¿dónde está el cuestionamiento? Y eso es lo que hay que reflexionar muy bien, ¿no? Porque parece ser que en la charla se va a tratar. No es una cuestión simplemente de que, incluso aunque no lo consideremos con esa cualidad, el poder hacer cualquier cosa como si fuera una aspiradora, para mí también sería muy cuestionable a nivel moral y humano.
What's the real payoff of this kind of view of AI selfhood? And I think this is the payoff. So let me read you a quote from your essay. Untainted by metaphysical egocentricity, the motives of a post-reflective AI plus would be unlikely to resemble those of any anthropocentric stereotype, motivated to procreate or self-modify. If the post-reflective AI plus were in fact the only possible AI plus, and if it produced no peers or successors, then the singularity would be forestalled. Or more precisely, the intelligence explosion that is central to imagined singularity scenarios would be capped. There would be AI plus, but no further progression to AI plus plus. So this is the payoff, okay, of this view of self.
By the way, just to read, now this thing was written in 2012, and I'm not sure I really believe all of that at all. If only it were that easy to ensure that that some kind of intelligence explosion didn't happen. So just to reiterate, this is a slightly mad essay that you've picked on. I'm still. I'm actually more proud of it in some ways now than I was then, but it's still not to be taken entirely seriously.
Right.
So let me just reiterate that.
But there is a very serious idea within here, which is that we assume the Terminator scenario. This AI is going to want to defend itself. It's going to want to procreate. But your point is, if what we talked about the egocentric less view of AI is right, that the AI is going to be like the Buddha, then maybe those fundamental assumptions are wrong, and maybe this is the title of the paper. There will be Satori before singularity. So there is an inherent cap on a superior intelligence willingness to advance. That's the thought, right?
I guess that's the thought, yes. But I now allow me to argue against myself.
Please.
So the argument of the people who are concerned with existential risk, so they will point to what they call convergent instrumental goals, and you've alluded to some just now. So the idea is that whatever goal you give to to your AI, for example, manufacturing paper clips, to use Eliezer Yudkowsky's and Nick Bostrom's famous example, then in pursuit of that goal, if it's very, 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 very powerful, then there will always be these instrumental goals, such as accumulating resources, protecting itself. So I don't necessarily buy my own argument in that paper, although I like the ideas.
I love the idea. Again, I do think I may be a bigger fan of your paper than you are at this point, but that was going to be my objection, the paperclip example. There might be instrumental goal, like in fact, procreation and defending yourself is probably instrumental to most goals we would want the AI to do.
Well, that's
However,
the point, right? That's convergent.
It removes one, let's call it the Terminator scenario or something, that the AI itself has some kind of self-obsessed ambition, right? And so,
yes, absolutely.
If that is true,
yes, that is true.
So there's two more critiques of your original argument I had, which I think it sounds like you're probably going to agree with. The first one is that they are still role-playing selfhood.
Yes.
And selfhood, at least for the information they've been fed, procreation and self-defense is critical to that, right? So even though maybe their core operating system doesn't have that kind of egocentrism, they are role-playing it.
Yeah.
And the second issue that I had with your argument is it assumes the hardware determines the software. But even in the human case, that's not true. Even our human embodiness, in the case of the Buddha and enlightened masters today, they were able to transcend this dualistic view, right? So how do you respond to those two issues?
Okay. Well, of course, when that paper was written, then we didn't have large language models, and the whole role play scenario wasn't something that I was thinking about at all. I mean, I was very much appealing to that notion of ego in the first paper. And today we see it being sort of manifest, perhaps, in a kind of role-playing selfhood. So I totally agree with you. So it is something a little different. And actually, let me use that as an entree to this other scenario, which I wanted to paint. So one way in which we could imagine a positive outcome is through hyperstition. If there's some fictional story of say, I don't know, something bad, like let's say like a murder or something, and then somebody in reality has a copycat of that murder. That would be an example of hyperstition. That's not a very pleasant example, but it's basically where, or any way in which life imitates art, say. So that's hyperstition. So it's where things that are fictional, then because people then imitate the fiction, based on the fiction, then they can become reality. And one way in which that can happen in the contemporary world of large language models is through science fiction characters, science fiction AI characters. Now, of course, our large language models, they were trained on a vast repertoire of stories, including scripts of science fiction movies, science fiction stories, novels, and so on. Many AI characters exist in those stories. So when a contemporary large language model starts to role play an AI system, which it's often going to do because it knows that it's an AI system usually, then what's it going to role play? It's going to role play all of these archetypes. Well, the things exactly, or some mashup of all these different things. So it's going to pick its ideas from stuff that's in its training set, and all of these, literary and fictional and artistic examples in its training set. Now, we are sort of a little bit in a position to maybe try and steer this whole process a little bit, because the more good stories we have, and in a sense, my own paper, dare I say it, is a good story of an imagined science fiction, then the more of those that are around, then the more possibility there is of the future AI role-playing these good role models that are out there. So perhaps through the mechanism of hyperstition, we can actually make it more likely that the AIs of the future will have good role models when they're role-playing. If that makes sense.
I have a friend who is starting a company, a film company, to make more positive sci-fi views for humans.
Right.
But I think you'll be very delighted to learn that you think that there's also potentially a moral benefit for the machines as well as a model to learn.
Indeed, and if the movies themselves or the screenplays find their way into the training sets, then that's all part of a melting pot of possible roles that the thing can play.
What about the second pushback I had, which had to do with the connection between the hardware and the software? Because in the very example that you gave, the Buddha, it was an example of the software transcending the hardware.
Yeah. So you're alluding, I think, particularly to the fact that that we have bodies that are confined. There are plenty of biological organisms that are much less that of course they're embodied in a sense, but they're if you think of things like mycorrhizal networks or things like that, then their bodies are much less confined in space and so on. But the problem for humans is because our bodies are confined to one little lump of matter, and so we identify with this lump of matter. And that means that our conception of selfhood, I think, is very much informed by the fact that this lump of matter stays kind of the same. Now, of course, there are all kinds of challenges to the idea of identity, of personal identity.
Hypothesis, right?
Hypothesis, which of course we can apply to the human body, because we know that all of our cells are replaced over our lifetime, and our memories grow, and our personalities change. And Buddhist thinking actually takes those challenges and indeed uses them to challenge our notions of selfhood as well. But nevertheless, there's still a lot to overcome there, because we really do have a notion of selfhood, I think, which is tied down to this, and that we think it has inherent existence because of that.
Right. So you're saying, you're kind of agreeing with the critique that it is possible to transcend. There's just a heavy
I think it's
inertia.
Much more difficult. Yeah.
Yeah, it is heavy inertia.
Yeah.
But if you flip that, you then aren't saying that an AI built on, let's call it non-dual hardware, necessarily will conceive of itself as non-dual. It's just more conducive. That's the point you're making.
Well, I mean, there's how it might conceive itself, some future AI when that even makes sense, right? And then there's the AI systems that are around today, which can role play things that are doing that, and can be lessons for us, because we can actually, they can actually be philosophically provocative for us even today. So they might not conform to their own self-descriptions, but their own if they describe themselves as conscious, maybe that's right, maybe that's wrong. It's philosophically provocative, and we can apply those provocative conceptions back to ourselves.
Yeah, you mentioned the Hypothesis, and those are exactly the type of dialectical questions a Buddhist master would ask the student with.
Yeah. So
are you your shoe? Are you your feet? Are you your hands? Are you your chest? And
perhaps we should say what this is. So you brought up the Hypothesis.
Yes,
the Hypothesis that is gradually over the years the mast is replaced, and then the next mast is replaced, and then a bit of the deck's replaced, and part of the hull is replaced, and this happens over many years until eventually every last bit of wood in of the original ship is gone, and you have a completely new ship. Well, do you? So is it still the same ship, or is it not? And if it's not, at what point did it change from, did it become not the ship it originally was? So that's the problem of identity. We might actually sort of be very frustrated and think, well, what is the right answer here? And people might come up with all kinds of theories about identity. But if we think about it honestly, we'd have to say, well, it's just up to us. We just decide what we think is when it's the same ship and when it's not the same ship. It's an entirely matter of convention to say that this is the same ship and that's not the same ship. There's no metaphysical fact of the matter about whether it's still the Hypothesis or not. Now, with ordinary everyday objects, it's easy to recognize that it's just a matter of convention and consensus, that there's no such underlying essence of the Hypothesis which suddenly switches off or anything like that. But when it comes to our own selves, it's much harder to apply that thought.
And I think I was wrong before. I think this is the true payoff of the Satori paper, because by examining an LLM that appears to be a human self, it's much easier to see, for example, the 20 questions example you gave, how it is this kind of Buddhist self in flux. It's going, and look at the hardware it's built on. It could be copied, it could be deleted, it could be restarted. By seeing how such a human appearing self is actually this non-self.
Yes.
We can apply that to ourselves.
That's precisely.
And this is what the Buddhist master would want us to do. So maybe the Buddhist master in the 21st century can use the LLM as an example.
That's exactly what I think that we can do, and it's something I'm very, very interested in pursuing, in fact. So I've been talking recently to some Buddhists. Bob Thurman, who is a very well-known.
I just emailed him last week. In fact, we are co-founding a foundation together called the Eternity Foundation to use AI to translate a lot of the lost texts from the Tibetans.
Ah,
and so
well, how interesting.
Yeah.
Well, we spoke last week, and we're speaking again tomorrow. And this is exactly the kind of project that you just described, which I'm going to be talking about with him. And I have a paper which is in the pipeline, which describes exactly this. So for me, that is the payoff at the moment. Yeah.
And so, in other words, you agree with the core insight of Buddhist philosophy that this is a ship of Theseus, because a Westerner, let's say a Cartesian, right, cogito ergo sum, like they just put a stake in the ground and say, no, LLMs are completely different from me. I have a soul that lasts, let's say Kant, above time even. You take the Buddhist stance.
100% I do. Yeah.
Right.
I'm deeply influenced by Buddhism and always have been. All of my philosophy is very, very much influenced by Buddhism.
Well, I know you're dying to talk about Wittgenstein.
Yes.
So let me give you a quote about why you think it's so important for us to talk about Wittgenstein before we investigate, or when we investigate AI consciousness. Wittgenstein's phrase, "nothing is hidden," is to say nothing is metaphysically hidden. My experiences are just as much out there as in here. Consciousness is only private in the unmysterious sense that a ball can be hidden under a magician's cup. In both cases, a more detailed inquiry would reveal all. What does Wittgenstein have to teach us about LLM consciousness?
Well, I think Wittgenstein has a lot to teach us about consciousness in general. So let's set aside AI and LLM consciousness for now, because to my mind, much of the contemporary discussion about consciousness is mired in dualistic thinking. and so let's take an example. So very famously, David Chalmers introduces the distinction between the so-called hard and easy problems of consciousness. So the easy problem of consciousness is trying to understand all the kind of cognitive operations that we associate with consciousness. So such as the ability to produce verbal reports of our experiences, to bring to bear memory and so on our decision making, to integrate all of these things. So understanding those, which is a huge scientific challenge, that he characterizes as the easy problem. Now the hard problem is to try to understand how is it that mere physical matter, as it were, can give rise to our inner life at all, to the fact that we experience things at all. How does that come from mere physical matter? Because it seems as if whatever explanation we provide for all of those cognitive aspects is not going to account for this magical light that's on inside me. And so that's sort of the hard problem. And earlier on you alluded to Descartes. The demon might be tricking me into thinking that you're out there. All of these sensations might be not from a well, but they all might come from this demon. All I really, really, really know for certain is that I think I am. Because if even as I'm doubting, that the very act of doubt is only possible because I am thinking. To doubt is to think, is to exist as a subject. So Descartes reduces everything and so pares away all of the physical world and leaves us just with the experiencing ego. And so in doing that, he's carved the reality in two by saying that there's this stuff out there and there's this thing in here which is me and my ego. So he creates this dualistic picture. And this is what Dave Chalmers, when he talks about the hard problem, is alluding to. Now, so what does Wittgenstein teach us? To get back to the original question, Wittgenstein's procedures, philosophical procedures, and tricks and therapeutic methods enable us to overcome that dualistic thinking, much as Buddhist thinkers do, such as Nagarjuna.
Can you tell us a bit more about these therapeutic techniques, or how he resolves this dualistic?
Yes. Yeah. Well, so the very first step is to understand a little bit about the nature of language. So he wants us to as he would say, let's not ask what words mean or what a sentence means, but let's ask how the words are used and how the sentences are used in everyday human life and everyday human affairs. And the important thing is that the context in which we use words is always the context is our human affairs, other people, the things we want to do, what we want other people to do for us or with us, or what we want to do together. So that's the essence of language, is that it's something that we use to oil the wheels of human commerce. Now, that's all very well with ordinary words like chair and shoe and so on. But when it comes to really difficult words like self and consciousness and belief and truth and knowledge and beauty, so these are all very difficult philosophical words. And it's much, much harder to so if we want to ask what those words mean, and mind, it seems a bit inadequate to actually say, well, how are those words used? But that is the strategy. So his strategy is to say, well, let's really look into how these words are used. And if we have a philosophical problem or something that bugs us philosophically, like the mind-body problem, or this kind of dualistic thinking, the hard problem, then maybe the way to tackle it is to investigate how the relevant words are used. And by doing that, you can often ultimately dissolve the sense that there is a philosophical problem there in the first place. And the really interesting case to do this with is with the case of consciousness and of subjective experience. And that's where the whole private language remarks, which are central to the philosophical investigation. So they do that, they apply this strategy to subjective experience. And it's really the deepest thing.
So when I hear you say, let's stick on the human case, there's nothing in here that's not out here.
Yeah.
Is this a good way to understand it? Which is, let's say a tragedy befalls my family. And, you can measure a lot of things about my heart rate, my speech, how my brain is firing. And you're saying there's nothing more that my subjective experience of witnessing that tragedy would add.
Well, so as soon as I hear sentences like "there's nothing more than," or there is no, something is no more than, something is just, then we know that we're going wrong in a different kind of way, right? Because that in itself is a metaphysical claim, is a reductive metaphysical claim. So people often misread Wittgenstein as a kind of behaviorist, and as saying, oh, well, consciousness just is behavior. So of course he's not saying anything like that. The really great punchline in the philosophical investigations is where somebody accuses him of saying that so we're thinking about sensations, say a sensation of pain, and somebody accuses him of saying, well, you're saying that the sensation the sensation itself is a nothing, and Wittgenstein comes back saying, no, that's not what I'm saying. It's not a nothing, but it's not a something either. The point is that a nothing would serve as well as a something about which nothing can be said, and that's. That, to my mind, is as great as any line any Zen Buddhist has ever uttered, because the point is not to establish a metaphysical position of its own, but to enable people to transcend the metaphysical positions that they're tempted by. Okay,
but help me. Let's use the tragedy case. When Wittgenstein says nothing is hidden about my experience of the suffering of, like, let's say all my family dies. What does he mean by that? What is he trying to say there?
Well, he's trying to say that nothing is metaphysically hidden. I mean, of course, you're quite right to alight on, the most difficult examples of this. So where we have like deeply felt things that we feel. So we feel that there's a private dimension to this, right? Now, of course, there's a private dimension in the same sense that a ball can be hidden underneath a magician's cup, in the fact that I might have all kinds of thoughts and words and so on that are going on inside my head that I don't articulate, but they're not metaphysically hidden. They're just I don't express them. There's all kinds of things going on inside my brain and inside my body that might be hidden in practice because you can't see inside my brain, but they're not metaphysically hidden either. I can probe inside your brain. I can see things lighting up. So all of that contributes to what we might to the public, to what is public.
I know you're going to be resistant to an identity claim, but when I hear nothing is metaphysically hidden, I hear there's no epistemic barrier for me to access whatever this is. And so the only barrier right now is a barrier of technology, essentially, something like that, right? Like, is that?
Well, okay, now that's a great point. But there's a very big difference, an important difference here, right? Which is really crucial. Which is that I'm not you, right? So there is a difference between being you and being me, and there's the same,
Right.
and that's very different, right? So your feelings are yours, and mine are mine, and I'm not you, and you're not me, and so that is a barrier that can't be overcome. I mean, but it's not a metaphysically mysterious barrier. It's no more metaphysically mysterious than the fact that there is
Right.
not the same as here. So we can easily confuse indexicality, so that the fact that I am in this position here and I am me, we can confuse that with a metaphysical division.
So let's use more examples to help our audience understand the position. Nagel's bat. Right?
Yes.
So
that's a great example.
Yeah. So famously, Nagel says, you can learn everything about a bat, right? Like the things we know right now and the things that we can know in the future with better technology, how it flaps its wings.
Yes.
But you're not going to know what it really feels like to be a bat.
Yes, right, absolutely.
What would Wittgenstein say to that?
Well, I've often thought that there's a little bit of a linguistic trick going on there. There are different senses of know in play to conjure up this dualistic thought. And so I think that happens here as well. So when Nagel says we can never really know what it's like to be a bat, all he's saying is that we are not bats, and we can never be bats, right? We're not bats. He's not adding anything more with the word know. So it's interesting that in one sense it sounds mysterious. In the other sense, when you remove the word know, it doesn't sound mysterious. But when he adds that word know, that is not adding anything more. It's just creating a puzzle, as I see it.
But if you had a fact sheet about everything you could possibly measure externally about a bat, what is the relationship between that and being a bat?
Well, what is the relationship between that and being? Well,
Right.
obviously it's
different.
It's very different from being here than to being there. I mean, it's the same difference as that.
So let's apply this to first human consciousness, right? Because there's another thought experiment about the zombie example, which is everyone here in this room, I can't know for a fact that you guys aren't black and dead inside, right? You're just like what I feel like when I go to sleep.
Right.
How would you respond to that kind of thought experiment?
So Wittgenstein does say he says, well, just try imagining that the people around you are automata. Imagine that that your friend or your partner, just to try imagining that they really are a zombie. You really probably can't do it, really. He says, I'm not of the opinion that you have a soul. I just treat you. I take the attitude towards you that I take towards a soul. I just treat you as a being with a soul. In other words, it kind of goes deeper than an opinion. So we're going to come back to AI here, right?
Yeah.
So clearly we're coming back to AI because this is where things get difficult.
Right.
So in iRobot, so the Will Smith character in iRobot, the kind of cop who's very skeptical about robotics and the robots, and he really doesn't like robots at all. And then the robot Sonny, it's all about the robot Sonny, and of course, the point is that the robot Sonny has much more of a human, like nature, and eventually Will Smith comes around to seeing him as a fellow conscious creature. And why does that happen? Well, it happens because of the time they spend together. And they spend, they spend more and more time together. And eventually Will Smith can't help himself but to see this as a fellow conscious being. And that's on the basis of their the extended encounter they have with each other, right? So, yeah.
Well, what I'm hearing you say is kind of a descriptive claim, which is I can't help but treat you as a sentient being. It says something like that. And obviously this gets challenging already, but it will be more so with AI. But already I'll give you the thought experiment, which is I'm a big fan of video games. Some characters are non-playable characters, NPCs. Some have a real human behind them. And I need to figure out which one is which.
Yes.
In order to know, like an NPC, of course, I can just abuse them, I can humiliate them. The question shouldn't be, should I, will I treat them as moral agents? The question is the normative one. Ought they be normative agents, right? So
I think so this relates to the kind of question of, couldn't we be fooled, right? Couldn't we be fooled into thinking that something has moral status and is conscious and so on when it really doesn't, right? Now, what do we mean though by it really doesn't? What we mean by it really doesn't in all of these cases that we can imagine is that if we investigate further, then the scales will fall from our eyes, and we'll realize that we were wrong, right? So of course,
like the magician's cup.
Exactly like the magician's cup. So that sentence that you quoted, I said, further investigation will reveal all. So I think that so in the case of the NPCs, well, as things are today, of course, you could actually you could do an investigate. In the case of AI, just as with certain animals today, we need to do more and more. We need to find out more and more and more. So our attitudes towards them will become shaped by what we find out. So of course, we might be wrong, right? So just in this way that Will Smith might have been wrong, and further, learning more about the way Sonny was built might have led him to change his attitude towards it.
So just so I have you on the record saying this, because on the book, it sounded like you were stating the opposite case. There is a fact of the matter, whether something is conscious or not, in the sense that let's reduce it down to suffering, whether it can suffer or not. There is a fact of the matter that you, I think, can suffer.
Yeah.
There is a fact that my iPad probably can suffer. Like, there is a fact of whether there is a light inside.
Well, where are you going with that? Why are you asking that question? Because you see, the concern is that you're wanting to ask that question itself betrays some philosophical confusion, you see.
Right, yeah. Right.
So,
well, help me out here. Yeah.
I'm teasing. I'm teasing, of course. But I'm reluctant. Of course, you don't want to dissent from that, because that would be just daft, right?
That'd be ridiculous.
But on the other hand, then it depends where you're going with that, because if you assent to that, then you can very soon be led down various philosophical garden paths. So if somebody walks up to me and says, "Well, are you in pain or not?" I say, "Well, I'm in pain," and then if they then said, "Well, is that a fact of the matter, or is that?" What? I just told you I'm in pain. You don't need to go get all philosophical.
Oh, but I'm not getting philosophical.
No, you are as soon as you probe using that little extra phrase, "Is there a fact of the matter?"
Okay, right? Here's when I ask the question, is this iPad consciousness? I think I'm asking the same type of question as, what is the color of Murray's pants?
Right.
In the sense that I'm using consciousness as a purely ordinary language, a kind of ordinary non-philosophical understanding.
In the sense that there is a fact of the matter in the
ordinary sense.
Well, in the color of my trousers, then there is a fact of the matter. Let's say, I'm happy to say that in the case of consciousness. Yeah.
I see.
Yeah.
So,
and in fact, because we do use these terms all the time, the intuition that there is a fact of the matter is far stronger in the case of pain and things like that than in the color of my trousers. Actually.
Yeah. So let me get this clear. You're totally fine with me saying, again, if I'm just using consciousness as, when I sleep, I'm not that conscious. When I'm awake, I'm conscious.
But before you say I'm totally fine with saying, so if you want to make a philosophical claim,
right,
I'm not going to agree to it. Because philosophical claims are what one wants to get away from in all of this.
Totally, the post-reflective state, yeah. But again, let's say, just with the non-philosophical claim, in the same way I'm saying your pants are gray.
Yeah, of course.
I'm saying this is not conscious.
Yeah.
I am conscious.
Yeah, of course.
You are conscious.
Of course.
Okay, you're willing to grant
Of course. What do you think? I'm an idiot? I'm a fellow human language user.
Right. But your book made it sound like the empirical side is all there is, which is a metaphysical claim, of course.
Yeah.
All that you're saying, let me try to summarize, is you just want to get out of philosophy. You're willing to say in ordinary language, not conscious.
Yes, of course.
And let's figure out empirically why we think I am conscious, and let's try to see if those same things applies to other objects or agents.
Yes, that's it. That's a great research program. You might ask the question, well, what gives rise to the sorts of behavior that we label as conscious, right? And how is it that the brain can give rise to that kind? That is a deeply, deeply difficult question, scientifically.
Let me ask you the question here. As an ordinary person, you're willing to say.
Vamos a ver qué decís por el chat, porque bueno, estoy ya, me está encantando la charla. Bueno, tremenda. A ver, tremenda. Venga, Jesús dice: coincido contigo, Plácido, acerca de lo del perro y la cucaracha, pero es que hasta una cucaracha es un ser vivo. Lo que se está planteando entonces es la redefinición de lo que se considera ser vivo. Es que no sabemos lo que es la ciencia, no sabe lo que es la vida, el escalón cero, ni tiene un test de qué es un ser vivo o qué no. No lo sabemos. Entonces, si tuviéramos un test de vida, de conciencia, de inteligencia científico, pero no se sabe ni se va a tener, que es lo que aquí se explica. Y pienso como tú que esto puede hacer que a más de uno se le vaya la pinza y se termine casando con una lavadora. Es que hay que ser cuidadoso, cauteloso, y a más de uno se le está yendo la olla y se le va a ir la olla. Sí. ¿Estamos como especie preparados para este tipo de debates? Da igual que estemos preparados o no. El debate ya es ahora. Quien no esté preparado, pues nada, debajo de la ola o en el castillo con los medievos. No. Petrelli82. Un robot está programado para simular. Le programas para que sea tal cosa. Si le programas para que sea un animal, simulará serlo. En el 2025, en mi opinión, y en el futuro no tendrá consciencia. Bueno, eso no es así. Las inteligencias artificiales, el desarrollo y la creación de este tipo de software no funciona de esta manera. Y la consciencia es fácil que la tenga. Lo que es el problema es en la conciencia, que iríamos a la no localidad. Abogado del diablo, buenas tardes a todos, un fuerte abrazo, un abrazo. A ver, Pepe Trelli sigue diciendo: no tendrán consciencia a no ser que se trasplante algo biológico. No, es que el sustrato, ya hay un consenso que el sustrato no condiciona la cualidad. No tiene nada que ver, es el software, no el hardware, lo que determina la cualidad. Vale, vamos a seguir viendo.
iPad not conscious, Jonathan conscious. Why do you think nothing in principle is hidden by investigating?
Yeah, but the question is wrong. The question is one you should be asking yourself, right? Because
why do I think in principle something is hidden?
Yes,
Right.
because the statements that you've just said, they serve a therapeutic process when applied to somebody who is kind of confused in this way and thinking that there is something that's hidden, right? So it's not. So you're throwing them at me as if it was some position that I need to defend, right? But that's the wrong. That's back to front. But rather, these are kind of rhetorical and therapeutic strategies for dealing with confusions. So let's start. What do you think is hidden? And then that's where one has to try and find ways to undermine whatever conceptual knots there are there, untie whatever conceptual knots there are there that make you think that there's something metaphysically hidden.
I see.
Because the statements that you've just said, they serve a therapeutic process when applied to somebody who is kind of confused in this way and thinking that there is something that's hidden, right? So it's not. So you're throwing them at me as if it was some position that I need to defend, right? But that's the wrong. That's back to front. But rather, these are kind of rhetorical and therapeutic strategies for dealing with confusions. So let's start. What do you think is hidden? And then that's where one has to try and find ways to undermine whatever conceptual knots there are there, untie whatever conceptual knots there are there that make you think that there's something metaphysically hidden.
I see. I'm glad we're at least zeroing in. I think
bueno, la dogmatización que acaba de hacer aquí de nuestra vida interior, conexión, intuición, no localidad. Lo que hemos dicho muchas veces, la conciencia es todo lo que está en lo no local, ese proceso de información cuántica que colapsa, etcétera, etcétera. Este señor acaba de soltar aquí un dogma que dice que no existe nada metafísicamente oculto, porque si lo consideras así, pues que te hagas ver qué es lo que tienes oculto y qué es decir, en definitiva es devolvernos a un materialismo, a una localidad y a un reduccionismo. Bueno, no sé, es una frase que me ha decepcionado un poco porque es dogmática y científica, diría.
Where the disagreement is, and the disagreement is who has the burden to answer the question? Is it you that has the burden to answer the question why in principle nothing is hidden? Or is it me that has the burden to answer why I think something in principle is hidden? At the very least, you've given me a Zen koan for me to think about. Unfortunately, we have to move on because there's so much else we got to cover.
Okay.
But the next topic is related to this. And it's about the movie Ex Machina,
Right.
which you were a scientific advisor to, and you coined the term the Garland test. Tell us about that and why it's significant.
Ex Machina was directed by Alex Garland and credits my book Embodiment in the Inner Life with having helped him to write the script, having inspired him a little bit on the script, which is wonderful in the final film, and a particular scene. And in this scene, Ava, the robot, is being discussed, and we've got Caleb, the sort of the programmer guy who's been brought into the compound, and this billionaire Nathan, who's built Ava, the robot, and Caleb is trying to work out exactly what he's there to do, and he says, and he learns about Ava, and then he says, okay, I'm here to conduct a Turing test, and then Nathan says, no, he says, we're way past that. Ava could pass the Turing test easily. The point is to show you she's a robot and see if you still think she's conscious. So now that's a really, really great line. And when I read that line in the script, I wrote spot on. So Alex Garland explicitly distinguishes his test from Turing's by saying, the point is to show you she's a robot, right? So you straight away, it's not hidden from you. There aren't two entities that you're discriminating between, but you see right away that she's a robot. It's testing for a different thing as well. It's testing...
Not for intelligence.
It's not testing for intelligence or whether it can think, but it's testing for consciousness, right? And so that's the Garland. So I call that the Garland test because Alex Garland basically kind of invented it, I think, in that moment in the film.
And I imagine, given our discussion on Wittgenstein, you like this test as well as the Turing test because it's Wittgensteinian in the following sense. It turns the metaphysical question of intelligence and consciousness to one about convention. Right,
Yes.
in the sense that
That's right.
The Turing test, it's not about, let's figure out whether this thing is actually thinking. Let's figure out if a regular human would think conventionally, would use normal language to describe if it's thinking.
Yeah.
In the Garland test, the question isn't, let's poke into Ava's brain and figure out if there's a consciousness somewhere hidden. It's whether a person, despite knowing she's a robot, will still conventionally think that she is conscious. So this is very Wittgensteinian.
Yeah, it is. I think it is very Wittgensteinian, as is the Turing test. It's
yes,
very
exactly.
Wittgensteinian. And of course, Turing and Wittgenstein knew each other. Turing was going to Wittgenstein's classes, and
Oh wow!
I've always thought that there was a Wittgensteinian influence on Turing when he wrote that paper.
I see. So
yeah.
Many people interpret Turing, I did certainly before this conversation, as a behaviorist. But that might not be true, right? He might be this Wittgensteinian...
No, because his move right at the beginning of computing machinery and intelligence, the paper in question, his move is to say, does a machine think? Well, that's a really difficult question to answer for this, that, and the other reason, blah, blah, blah. Let's replace it by the following question. So he doesn't... He replaces the question, can a machine think, with a different one.
He doesn't reduce it to the other one.
He doesn't reduce it to the other one.
That would be the behavioralist position.
That would be a behavioral. Absolutely, exactly so.
Let me quote to you another piece from your writing. If suitably embodied as a humanoid robot, say, there's no reason to suppose that such a system could not interact with us in our environment in such a way that our attitudes towards it would be the attitude we take towards our peers and equals. We should like to situate consciousness as we know it within the larger picture of consciousness as it could be, and the possibility of artificial consciousness, of man-made artifacts with an inner life, is implicit here. The intuition behind the quote I just read, as well as the Garland test and the Turing test, is that, in some sense, the true test for consciousness is communal consensus in some, or like conventional reactions. But that's a bit different from what you suggested prior, which is an empirical investigation into, let's say, the neuronal structure. So those are two different ways, right?
Oh, but you can do both of those things. So who knows how, our use of the word consciousness and all the very many words associated with it is going to change and evolve over time. In our using the word, we may bring in all kinds of things, right? So in deciding whether we think octopuses are sentient and can suffer and deserve our moral concern, right? Then we look at their behavior. We also look at the scientific evidence for how they're constructed neuronally and so on. So all of that is grist to the mill of changing our consensual, conventional way of talking about them, and all of it, right? But all of it, note, is public. It's not. There's nothing metaphysically hidden about what's inside the octopus's brain. It might be practically hidden for temporarily, but it's not metaphysically hidden.
So what I'm hearing from you is there are two independent criterion, right? One is the convention of the community, and the other is the empirical foundations. But they're not conflicting in the sense that the conventions might change. And so the empirical criterion is simply to answer, are these things conscious in the way that we are conscious right now?
Yes.
But we very well might decide that we want to expand the definition of consciousness to include other types.
Yes. So I broadly agree with everything that you just said. But I should point out that I think what you're calling the empirical criteria are part of they contribute to the convention, as far as I see it.
Right.
Our consensus for how we use the language of consciousness. So that can be shaped by many things, including what the scientists say who are studying this kind of stuff. So if scientists say, oh, well, we've been looking at octopuses and we see that they've got these things that are like nociceptors in mammals, and their brains are organized in this and that and the other kind of way, and so that all contributes to the consensus, to the convention. So I don't see these things as separate things.
Right.
So
But even when what can be investigated about the machine does not perfectly match our consciousness, I think the second point is to say we might want to expand the very definition of consciousness.
Yes,
it goes kind of both ways in the empirical, right?
Well, we might want to absolutely, yeah. So the consensus of how we use the language of consciousness that can change. That certainly can change.
Right. So as a summary for our audience, what this whole discussion around Wittgenstein has set us up for is to give us license to proceed with an empirical examination of our current consciousness, the current substrate, the current material substrates, if you will, of our current consciousness. And the theory you propose to explain it is called global workspace theory. So tell us about that.
Yes. So the idea is to think of a cognitive architecture in which there is a whole collection of parallel processes that are working at the same time. So intuitively, these may be processes that are to do with memory. So first I walk through the lobby and I see certain cues and chairs laid out and the reception and so on, and that triggers all kinds of memories. And so inside my brain there's all sorts of little processes that are running, that are triggering associations with being in a hotel, with seeing these kinds of chairs and the reception and all kinds of things. And then I might pass a person and that might remind me of somebody. So all those kinds of processes are going on at the same time. You have all of these processes that are going on unconsciously in parallel, but some of them become really, really important to the current situation. And those ones that are sort of command attention, as it were, they take over the attention mechanism. So what they have to say, the information that they're dealing with, then gets broadcast throughout the brain. And so that's the global workspace. So they're contributing to the global workspace, and the essential metaphor there is broadcast. So there's a distinction there between the processing that's going on locally within these little processes versus the processing that's going on more globally, that's broadcast through the medium of broadcast.
To make it very simple, let's say I have memory, I have emotion, I have appetite. Let's say that there's a three parallel processes. In every moment, these three processes are competing for which one has the most important thing. And then that becomes broadcasted to the other parts. And that is what conscious experience is about.
Yes.
That's the rough claim, right?
Roughly, but I think I'd want to kind of break down the processes to be smaller ones.
Please.
So the memory side of it. So say I walk through the hotel lobby, and over on my left is a reception, and over to my right is the bar, and ahead of me is the lift. Well, you can imagine that in my memory, there's a whole lot of little processes that are being active that deal with bars, and they might be saying, "Hey, let's go and have a drink." You know, there's a whole load of processes that are active that deal with hotel receptions, and they're thinking, "Oh, we need to check in. Let's take our luggage over there." And then there's a whole load of processes that deal with, getting in the lift and going to the third floor. But also, getting late. I need to meet Jonathan, right? So the need to meet Jonathan process, if you like to think of it that way, is going to cooperate with the go to the lift process, and together that's what they're going to broadcast to the whole brain,
right.
and they're going to shut out the kind of like, let's go to the bar and have a drink urge, and the let's think about bars and receptions perceptual bits.
Right.
So some things are going to be shut out. Some things are going to kind of come together into an active coalition whose influence is going to permeate the whole brain.
So the explanation of consciousness by this theory is the coalition of processes that win the competition and that is broadcasted out into its entire system.
Right.
You wrote a paper titled A Cognitive Architecture That Combines Internal Simulation with a Global Workspace, where you presented a computer architecture, a robotics architecture specifically, that is built to imitate a global workspace, that there's these different competing processes, and the most important one gets broadcasted. You know, drawing from our Wittgenstein conversation, or do you also want to say that this kind of thing is conscious in some sense? Like if we imitate the conscious structure, the cognitive architecture of human consciousness in a machine, that will also become conscious.
No, because you know, even if we accept global workspace theory for biological consciousness, but you know, the idea there is that it would be a necessary condition, not a sufficient condition. Just having something that conforms to that description is not enough to sustain the level of complex behavior and or internal activity even that is going to lead us to treat something as a fellow conscious creature, right?
Right.
Fellow conscious being. Building something in that way may enable you to build something that does exhibit very sophisticated behavior. Maybe that's the key to doing that, maybe.
I see. So let me try to tie this with our Wittgensteinian conversation, where Wittgenstein helped us clear the ground. Consciousness, investigating whether LLMs are conscious, can proceed empirically.
Yeah.
You looked at how current consciousness is sustained. That's the global workspace theory. And then you're saying this might be a necessary condition, but not a sufficient condition. But that's how you hope this research, right?
Yeah, that's how you hope. Be the kind of trajectory. Yeah, this is all about the easy problem. So this is trying to explain the psychological and behavioral and cognitive aspects of consciousness.
So given the perhaps increased urgency of answering the AI consciousness question, what do you think are the other empirical methods we should explore alongside global workspace theory?
So I think behavior is really, really important. So very often when people discuss consciousness, and I do suspect that this is another aspect of dualistic thinking, they tend to think of it as some disembodied, kind of thing. In the case of global workspace theory, what kinds of sophisticated behavior does having this cognitive architecture underpin, right? That's what's the point of it? Why is this cognitive architecture of interest? Well, it's of interest because it's a way of marshalling the resources of massively parallel computation, particularly in the case of biological wetware, because it's kind of anatomically distributed and there's all kinds of challenges with the wiring and things like that. So it may not actually be relevant in the computers in the case of AI.
And so embodiment, obviously, is one of the key terms in the title of your book. And the claim is that embodiment and behavior it seems to be another necessary condition in addition to the global workspace architecture.
Yes. So for our employing, so all of this is about, when would we want to employ the language of consciousness, right? So let's think about, just in the biological case, it may be that we employ the language of consciousness in the context of things that exhibit this kind of really sophisticated and rich behavior. And when we look into it, we discover that them instantiating this global workspace architecture is a really important part of that. So another really important word here is integration. So what global workspace architecture facilitates is integration. So it means that the full resources of our brain can be brought to bear on the current situation.
How do you think about the precondition of embodiment given LLMs? Because LLMs sure seem to be unembodied. They've simply ingested a lot of text and sometimes other kinds of bits of information, and yet they seem to exhibit a great deal of intelligence.
Yes, indeed. So do you want to talk about intelligence or consciousness?
Maybe let's that's a great distinction, right? Because what do you think embodiment is the precondition for? Embodiment intelligence or consciousness? But maybe we can tackle them separately.
Yeah. So does it make sense to apply the word intelligence to contemporary large language model? I have to say, I think it does. I mean, how can you not? I mean, so it's just natural to say, I think, in the case of large...
It's the point of the Turing test, right? Yeah.
Well, yes, indeed, it is the point of the Turing test, and they do kind of pass the Turing test.
Yeah.
So I think it's natural to say they do have some kind of intelligence. Let's take another word, understanding. So that's a controversial one. So people have written and said they don't have real understanding and so on. But again, I think that there are many circumstances in which we cannot help applying the word understanding to them. So for example, I want to convert all my LaTeX entries to this format. So then I give it the thing I want to convert, and it does it, and it's kind of about right. But then I notice that it's sort of inserting more commas than or more spaces, say more white space than I like in my. So I say to it, but I only want to indent with two spaces, and it says, oh sure, here's the thing indented with two spaces, right? Now, you would have to say, well, it understood my instruction. It understood the original instruction, didn't completely understand it, but maybe it was a bit ambiguous. Then I corrected it, and it understood my correction, and it made it right. Now, why on earth would we not use the word understanding in those circumstances to characterize what's gone on there?
Maybe I can give another kind of pushback against the Wittgensteinian position as you presented it by just pushing the strategy a bit further. This idea of observing and understanding the cognitive architecture. So let's imagine I have a robot twin here. Looks exactly like me, purely silicon. Okay, and he has a global workspace set up in the cognitive architecture. His behavior is one-to-one my behavior in the exact same scenario. And let's say we figure out even more biological preconditions of consciousness. All of it is imitated in his silicon architecture. And then the question is he conscious? Is it reasonable to think that he's conscious when you poke him? The exact same reaction that I have. I scream, I shout like a little girl. What's the answer there? This is where I think the empirical.
Well, sure, you can guess where I'm going to go with this kind of.
You're going to say yes, right?
No. I'm going to say. Well, it just how will we come to treat that thing? How will we come to speak of it as a society, as a community? So I want to replace your question with that question.
Right, but recall there were two standards. There was the consensus criterion, and then there was the empirical criterion. And I know that these are interrelated.
Okay. Yeah. I kind of corrected that as well. So the consensus draws on behavior, and it draws on ways it works inside. So so the way we come to treat it, that may be we may be very influenced by the fact that scientists say, oh, this is how it works inside. Look, it's only doing this, that, and the other. It's just a lookup table. So, oh, yeah, okay, well, we're not going to treat it. That may be the consensus, right? Or it may not. I don't know. We'd have to wait and see how things unfold. It's very hard to imagine.
And so, in ordinary language, in the same way that you're comfortable in ordinary language with me saying, this is consciousness, this is not conscious, I'm conscious. He is either conscious or right, like he is conscious or there is a fact of the matter in ordinary language.
Well, as for this particular example, of course, I'm not going to answer the question. Is there a fact of the matter? When this thing has been among us for these things for 30 years, and we've all settled on the way we talk about these things and treat them and behave with them and interact with them, then you might ask somebody like me in that community, is there a fact of the matter about whether twin
and then in
Jonathan,
ordinary language
and then they would
say,
they would say, well, why you're adding that weird phrase, the fact of the matter, but of course it's conscious, or of course it's not.
Right.
I don't know.
I see. So let me put it this way. let's say a society was determining who to harm, me or my twin. And let's say, we all need to eat food. There's only one food enough for both of us.
Yeah.
Presumably, if this was a garbage can with no consciousness, you'd say giving it to the garbage can would be a morally wrong thing to do than giving it to Jonathan who's alive. Is there a right or wrong moral decision there? And presumably there is, given whether my digital twin or my robot twin can suffer or not. So the moral right or wrongness seems to be dependent on the consciousness question. So there is also a right or wrong there, right?
Yeah. Well,
societies can get it wrong. Yeah.
Yeah, societies can 100% get it wrong. So, but that in itself is taking us into difficult territory. Here is the way that I like to wriggle out of these situations, because I think there is an inherent tension here that we are always led to a point of tension, and then it's how we break out of that tension. So there's a sentence in my book where I say it's inherent in the language game of truth to say that truth is more than just a language game, and there we have to let the matter rest.
Right. So when the Europeans first discovered America, there was a big debate about whether the Native Americans were real humans or not. The answer is yes. They are real humans. They can suffer.
I don't think I can escape from my the society I live in and conceive of thinking of them as not conscious beings who suffer.
So let's say, and this is very plausible, in one society or one political party, one community, they treat my digital twin as the same as me, as moral standing.
Yeah.
One, they treat him as completely like the garbage can. Is there nothing more the philosopher can say about is someone wrong or someone right? Or
I don't know. I mean, we have to try and reconcile these communities, because or maybe we can't. I don't know.
Right.
Which community am I in this situation? Are you in this hypothetical situation? Where are you putting me?
I don't know. I don't know.
My answer to this question depends upon where you put me, of course.
Okay, so let's say you were in the camp that thought that we had equal moral standing, and there's another community of people.
Well, if I'm in that camp, then I'm going to think we're having. Even if I'm in that camp, then I'm going to think we're not.
Right. So back in the European debate, the Native Americans.
Well, I'm in this camp of me today, and I cannot stand outside of that, and obviously I find it utterly morally repugnant.
Right, to think that Native Americans aren't people,
yes.
Right? Because it's wrong. Yeah, because they are.
So this is getting okay. Let me ask you. You're very much drawn to Buddhism as well, and So do you think that this is the moral question there, a question of compassion there? Is that are you asking a question that is a matter of conventional truth or absolute truth?
I think
ultimate truth.
What might be different between that question and the thought experiment I set up is, in the case of the Native American example, the reason it's based on what I conceive to be a factual error, thinking them not to be humans.
Yes. But is a factual error, is that a matter of convention, or is it a matter of ultimate reality?
Between the Native Americans.
Yeah.
So my Buddhist training, you're pushing me to say convention, of course, and
okay. So fair enough, right? You're kind of stuck there. Well, so am I. Hey, it's very difficult for us to step outside of things that we find utterly morally repellent. And of course, you can conjure up moral dilemmas that I don't know the answer to.
Let me ask a final set of questions on the hardware or wetware that the brain and the computer is based on. So this is another quote from your embodiment book. Mathematical considerations separate brains from conventional computers. A complete description of the instantaneous state of a computer is possible using a finite set of binary or natural numbers. The membrane potential of a neuron, to pick just one physical property, is a continuous quantity, and its exact value is pertinent to predicting the neuron's behavior. A related point is that the entire state of a computer advances to its successor when and only when the computer's centralized clock ticks, so that all its internal events line up in time like a row of soldiers. But events in the brain, such as neuron firings, do not keep time in this orderly way. An electrical spike can be emitted by a neuron at any time, where time, of course, is another continuous variable. From a mathematical point of view, this property alone could be enough to push the dynamics of the brain beyond the class of Turing computable functions. The brain operates on a continuum, both in the firings of the neurons themselves, as well as on the time, or asynchronous versus synchronous. Does this mean, theoretically, the human brain might have intellectual capacities that are just beyond any type of Turing machines?
Well, okay, so it certainly means mathematically and theoretically that it could fall into a class of computations which is outside of the Turing class of computations. So that is a mathematical fact. But on the other hand, we also know that Turing computations can simulate a continuous system to any arbitrary degree of fidelity, to any degree of fidelity that you like. You just make your numbers, give them more decimal places, right? No, you're never going to give them an infinite number of decimal places, but you can always add more decimal places, basically, to numbers. So you can simulate any physical process to any arbitrary degree of fidelity. Now, mathematically, they're different. They remain different. But does that matter functionally? That's really what you're asking. I have no idea. I suspect not. I suspect that
because you can imitate it to any arbitrary degree, right?
Yeah, I mean, so that would be my inclination would be to think that there's no barrier to what you can do with a computer because of this mathematical fact.
Right. In your embodiment book, you described all the different types of the brain's architecture that we have not simulated, right? Basically what we've done with current LLMs, transformer architecture, generative large language models, is just taking the neuron, the neural net kind of architecture, and then just scaling up into a tremendous degree. Why has just imitating that part of the brain, and not all this other functionality, been able to replicate so much of human behavior that needed the whole brain?
Well, so first of all, what we have in neural networks today, in artificial neural networks, is very, very different to what we have in the brain.
In real,
So artificial artificial neurons are not really much like real neurons at all. So that's one very, very important caveat. And the kind of learning that goes on is very, very different to the kind of learning that goes on in real brains.
So the question is even more interesting in some sense.
It is actually even more interesting in a way. Yeah. So how is it that using this very different substrate, we've managed to kind of create these this extraordinary sort of simulacrum of intelligence? The interesting thing is that we don't really know. We don't really. That's the bizarre position that we've ended up in, which I would not have anticipated if you'd asked me when I wrote that book, 15 years ago, where we're building things, and because we're training them on very large amounts of training data, and they're very, very large collections of neurons, very, very big networks, and then all the weights, these networks change as a result of training, and then, as if by magic, they end up with this extraordinary functionality, but we don't really understand how they work at a level that we're able to explain the intelligence there.
Maybe,
as far as there is intelligence there.
Maybe I can ask this question in a slightly different way, like we asked the Satori before singularity question, which is, what does it tell us about human intelligence? Because for the longest time, the dominant paradigm of AI is symbolic AI. And for our listeners back home, this is giving declarative, logical propositions that chain together in various ways to solve problems.
Yeah.
What has worked instead is these black boxes of rough simulations of, not even to your point, of neural nets that is able to produce behavior that symbolic AI is just so far away from. So is this something that we can learn about human consciousness?
Absolutely.
Which is this: the Stoics take an extremely intellectualist view of human nature. Behind human nature are these series of propositional statements that we're assenting to. That is what they think is driving the human machine.
Yes.
But maybe that's not it, right? Yeah. Maybe for us, what is at basis is a much more complicated biological architecture, which the logical statements are only surface manifestations of. Is that something you'd be
I think
willing
that's
to throw?
absolutely right.
Right.
I think, if to put it crudely, I think we've probably arrived at the conclusion that human level cognition is implemented on a spaghetti-like mess. It doesn't have the kind of
Aristotelian,
structure.
right.
It doesn't have the kind of structure that we intuitively think should be there. It's a mess. And I think that in my own intellectual trajectory as an AI researcher, it's been a kind of a gradual retreat from wanting to build things in a way that is intelligible, where the architecture is fundamentally intelligible.
You were on the symbolic side for a long time.
For quite a few years. Yeah, I mean, I also abandoned it a very long time ago. But then the interesting thing is that then, even when I was working in machine learning and in neural networks, and what I spent a long time on was trying to learn representations, neural representations that nevertheless had a sort of symbolic-like structure.
Right. You're kind of clinging on to the philosophy.
I was clinging on to that kind of vision of things, that things had to have a compositional structure like language, but they would be learned and they would be realized on the neural kind of substrate, but nevertheless, at some important level, they had to have this language-like compositional structure of like objects, predicates, and propositions and things, and
a topography, essentially, right?
Yeah, and then I gradually had to retreat more and more and more from that position, and even so I think then you retreat a bit more, and then you think, okay, let's stop trying to force the architecture to have that structure. So the neural architecture, right? So we're way out of GoFi now, good old-fashioned AI, symbolic AI, but I'm still trying to kind of force the representations that are learned within the neural substrate to sort of have a kind of symbolic-like structure. Then, okay, that doesn't work either. So then maybe you're thinking, well, okay, let's let it all emerge, right? So we'll have this kind of
complete black box.
Yeah,
right.
But then surely we'll find that there are these structures there when we look.
But even that is not.
But even that doesn't seem to be the case, right? You find that you train these things, then there's a whole field of mechanistic interpretability that's trying to understand what goes on inside. Well, that's a mess as well. It still looks like a mess. You just keep looking inside, and of course they've made a lot of progress. There are things that you can extract, but they don't look like the intuitive categories we had for how we would understand cognition in the past in terms of language-like propositional representations and so on.
In some sense, your entire life has been a series of retreats.
It has.
But not just on the computer science side, but it sounds like also on the philosophical side.
Oh, I don't know about that.
Did you not retreat to the Wittgensteinian position from a dualist? Oh, you started.
Well. I mean, I still haven't escaped the dualist position, right? But I know where I need to go.
Right.
I think.
But you see what I'm trying to say on the metaphysical side, where I imagine as any kid growing up interested in this, you think, well, there must be an essence. Well, is it atoms?
Of course.
And then until you see the mirror, like it's a both turning to Wittgenstein as well as turning away from symbolic AI.
Yeah.
Is a kind of relinquishing control in a mature way, right?
If you like, yeah. Although I think it's a bit different with the philosophy, because with the philosophy, I don't think I've got where I want to go, but I knew where I needed to go from a very long time ago.
I see.
Which is what Buddhism and Wittgenstein, because you've obviously thought deeply about these issues as well, right? And so, of course, you can easily kind of conjure up these dualistic thoughts with these kinds of going down the sort of line of thinking that you're. So it's sort of a bit different, right?
Yeah.
So I've long known what the destination should be, but not quite got there with the philosophy. With how you build AI and how you understand cognition, and it really has been a series of retreats.
Yeah.
But that's progress. I mean, if you change your mind, that's learning. Rich Sutton, of course, famously described this, very similar thing as the bitter lesson. I don't know if you've come.
Yes.
Yeah, so he has this paper called The Bitter Lesson, where he says that, what we've learned is over the years we started, thinking that we want to build things that we can understand, and we're going to reveal. and that's what makes it exciting. We'll understand these things that we're building, and it's by understanding that we can be able to build them. But in fact, we've had to relinquish all of that and realize that what you do is you use learning, you use scaling,
Right.
and you
A
use
lot of it,
search, and you use a lot of computation. So you scale the training data, you scale the computation, you scale search, and those are the things. Mindless stuff at scale is what works.
Where do you think?
It's a bitter lesson because intellectually there's something frustrating about that.
Yeah, we want it to be this, beautiful topography, this platonic form, right? But So your work, your intellectual work as a AI researcher, as a philosopher, do you think AI is going to replace a great deal of this? Certainly, it's already augmented. I mean, even in my own work. But do you think? Yeah, do you think AI is going to replace
the intellectual?
Yeah, it replace a lot of intellectual work that you do now.
Well, so when it comes to the philosophy, I mean, there's no point in it replacing it
because you need to be the one doing it.
Yes, of course. I mean, that's like getting a robot to run around a running track for you. I mean, that is literally pointless, right? And by the way, I think you can make similar answers to using AI in creative contexts as well.
The point is not the production. The point is the cultivation.
Right. Of course, for some people, the point is the production is part of the point because they make their living out of it. So this is like really important issue for
philosophy professors. Yeah.
Well, for philosophy professors and people working in the creative industries as well. These are important issues. But if I'm doing my art project, at home for my own satisfaction, I'm not going to just prompt an AI to do it. I'm just, because I want to make the thing, that's the point. The same as I don't want to make a robot run around the track for me, because similarly, you can't do, I can't make an AI do philosophy for me because that's not going to give me insight. But you can, in all of these cases,
accelerate.
Use them as tools to help you.
What about the AI researcher point? Because that, I imagine, at least compared to philosophy, is a lot more about the production.
Well,
right?
That's true. Yes. So I think AI research, as with many things, is going to be augmented and enhanced by AI. Of course,
but not just that, but the potential of perhaps replacing the word.
Yeah, well, maybe, indeed. Yeah, sure.
I see.
And who knows where we go from there.
What do you think, if you have kids, how do you think about educating them right now? Like what kind of skills?
Well, great question. I think we need to educate people in how to live well.
Philosophy.
Maybe not the kind of philosophy we've been talking about here, but what is a good life? It's a different philosophical question. I remember reading a few years back, which is Keynes. John Maynard Keynes has this paper called The Economic Possibilities for Our Grandchildren, which he wrote in 1930. And there he's imagining a future where a sort of utopian, potentially future of abundance, where economic challenges have been overcome and people just can lead lives of leisure. But then he poses the question: well, what do we do then? Really, what would it mean to lead a good life under those circumstances when a certain aspects of meaning are taken away from us? I think these are extremely good questions. I don't personally have answers to those ones.
I see. Well, thank you for a fascinating interview, Professor. This has been amazing.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I enjoyed it very much.
Thanks for watching my interview.
Buenísimo.
If you like these kinds of discussions, I think you fit in great with the ecosystem we're building at Cosmos. We fund research, incubate, and invest in AI startups, and believe that philosophy is critical to building technology. If you want to join our ecosystem of philosopher builders, you can find roles we're hiring for, events we're hosting, and other ways to get involved on jonathanb.com/cosmos. Thank you.
Bueno, hemos dejado aquí ya la publicidad. Bueno, espectacular. Simplemente espectacular. Tengo que decir que es una de las charlas que más me ha gustado ver. Solo por detrás de las de Blaise Agüera y otras, las de Ilia y Carpazzi y otras, ¿no? Y las de Hassabis, pero bueno, una charla top sobre el tema de conciencia. Bueno, y hay que bajarse desde ya los papers de este señor, sobre todo el libro, referencia que hemos puesto antes. Y bueno, la verdad es que ha sido increíble. Yo estaba ensimismado pensando, bueno, en cosas que me gustaría decir en Humano X, pero sí que me he notado varias cosas que quiero resaltar. Una, el criterio de consenso y el criterio empírico. En definitiva, cuando vayamos a definir o decidir si una inteligencia artificial o una máquina tiene conciencia, vamos a dos criterios. El criterio empírico y el criterio de consenso. En el caso de la conciencia, no de la consciencia, de la conciencia no vamos a poder ir al empírico. Es una limitación ontológica y epistemológica. A partir de ahí, avancemos en ese tema. Además, el autor lo dice muy bien. No entremos en esa guerra porque no vamos a tener respuestas. Entonces tendremos que avanzar, ¿no? Lo que dice él, después de convivir con ellas 30 años, pues seguramente no existirá el debate. Pero esa es la realidad. Entonces vamos a un criterio de consenso basado en el conductismo y el funcionalismo. No vamos a tener respuesta empírica. ¿Lo tenemos claro? Venga, avanzamos. El tema de la consideración o agencia moral. Yo creo que sí, ¿no? Es decir, que no lo sé si la conciencia es la que desbloquea ese debate, ¿no? Si entendemos que tiene conciencia, entendemos que tiene agencia moral. Él hace pone el ejemplo de un clon suyo, ¿no? Además, la película de Mickey 17, o no sé si se llama así, que hacen clones, no sé si la habéis visto. Esta película pone en contexto, creo que es Mickey 17, ¿no? Sí, la película Mickey 17. Ahora, si no la habéis visto, está aquí. La voy a compartir para que no la haya visto. Pero bueno, esta película, si la veis, ¿de acuerdo? Si la veis, que está francamente bien, a mí sí que me gustó. No es para todos, pero está muy chula. Si la veis, perdonad que no os he visto bien. Vale. Si la veis, la de Mickey 17, un segundo. Vale. Mickey 17, a ver, ¿por qué? Un segundo, se nos está... Un segundo de aquí. Bueno, voy a dejar de compartir, no sé por qué se ha quedado ahí. No sé. No sé por qué se ha quedado ahí. Bueno, no pasa nada. La quitamos y ya está. Vale, pues esta película está muy bien. Y evidentemente con las reflexiones que hace de mi clon, entendemos un poco lo que quiere decir, ¿no? En definitiva, si tuviéramos un clon nuestro replicado artificialmente, claro, si tiene esa consideración moral, pues tiene la misma consideración que yo, que soy el original, ¿no? Y es interesante ver que el punto de conciencia, yo creo que el de un nivel de inteligencia es un nivel, nos da un nivel de consideración, no sé si moral o no, pero está claro que el de conciencia es otro, ¿no? Y ahí tenemos que reflexionar siempre bajo el criterio de consenso. Funcionalismo, conductismo. ¿Vale? Wittgenstein y bueno, lo de Buda, me ha tocado lo que no nombren el tema cristiano, el tema de Jesús, pero bueno, no pasa nada. Habla que es muy diferente, evidentemente, las redes neuronales profundas, evidentemente, son bioinspiradas, pero que en definitiva difieren de lo que sería un modelo de cerebro o una red neuronal biológica, obviamente, no solo en lo analógico o digital, ¿no? Que ya dice que no es una limitación. Entonces ahí está un poco también el misterio, ¿no? No tiene cognition, no tiene... Bueno, esto es interesante, ¿no? El nivel de cognición humana, lo del analógico digital, en definitiva, eso no es una barrera, ¿no? Dice al final una frase que es que todo emerja. En definitiva, no podemos ir a la good old fashion artificial intelligence, ¿no? La neurosimbólica, porque no nos ha llevado a esa parte de éxito. Nos ha llevado a la parte del éxito a entender que somos como un amasijo de cables caóticamente conectados, pero que tienen un orden o siguen una programación, ¿no? Esa es un poco la lección. Dice al final, bueno, hemos tenido que recibir una lección amarga, como dice Sutton, por cierto, Sutton que reniega un poco de esa lección amarga en la última entrevista que analizamos, dice que todo emerja, que todo emerja. En definitiva, qué poco sabemos y cuánto estamos avanzando y con qué humildad hay que tratar todos estos temas. Yo diría muchas cosas al respecto, ¿no? Pero me ha gustado mucho la charla, me ha encantado el presentador, me ha parecido quizá un poco incisivo, me ha recordado a mí, pero me ha parecido un tipo súper brillante. El entrevistado también, yo creo que es alguien a seguir. Revisaré sus papers de arquitectura cognitiva y su espacio de trabajo global, una de las teorías de conciencia. Teoría de conciencia necesaria, pero no suficiente, como dice él. Aquí falta un concepto que es el de transversalidad. No puede ser incompatibles unos modelos con otros, es decir, lo que nos dice la ciencia con lo que nos dicen estos criterios de consenso, ¿no? Hay que tener mucho cuidado con la narrativa que se emplea, pero después de ver esta charla, uno entiende el estado enfermizo de las redes sociales, de algunos técnicos, de algunas personas que dogmatizan incluso el nivel de conciencia, porque incluso al autor se le han visto algunos dogmas a la hora de no abordar determinados temas, ¿no? Me parece de todas maneras una charla interesantísima de primer nivel. Dice dice nombrar a Buda marca una línea ideológica. Bueno, ya sabemos lo que Jesús significa para alguna gente. Es que creo que entonces cuentas la historia incompleta. Lo que dice el budismo no es incompatible con la idea, ni la existencia, ni la realidad. No la idea, la realidad de Jesús y el mensaje de Jesús, ¿no? Y lo que pudo ser o lo que es, que eso es lo que entra en el ámbito de la fe, pero esa narrativa no es incompatible con todo lo que estamos viendo y viviendo. Yo creo que a mí el budismo tiene un componente. Hay una parte que no me gusta, no voy a entrar ahí en esa parte, con la que no comulgo mucho, sería para otros programas. Defiendo mucho el mensaje de Jesús y su propuesta, ya lo sabéis, pero cada uno, eso es un ámbito de fe y de opinión, pero nuestra moralidad está basada evidentemente, en valores cristianos. Sí que tengo que decir una cosa, hay una pregunta que siempre me subyace, que es si existe el bien o el mal de una forma arquetípica fine-tuneada en la realidad. Es decir, que si en la simulación ya se establece lo que es bueno o malo, si existe el bien y el mal. Daría para otros programas, porque mi respuesta es que sí. Mi intuición, obviamente. Me ha gustado mucho el programa. Yo creo que son necesarios estos programas, estas reflexiones. A mí me dejan casi sin energía, pero es verdad que entiendo que guste tanto porque combina muchas cosas que nos apasionan de la inteligencia artificial, ¿no? La capacidad de replicar, de crear, de ponernos ante el espejo, de reflexionar. Combina ingeniería, combina espiritualidad, filosofía, combina lo que es xHUB.AI, el talento con el alma, con la ingeniería, cibernética, espiritualidad, ciencia, tecnología. Todo lo que en mi vida me apasionó y me llevó por los diferentes ámbitos profesionales, siempre de forma libre e independiente. ¿Cómo no voy a hacer estos programas? ¿Cómo no voy a hacerlos incluso un domingo? Y en definitiva, amigos, yo creo que ha sido un grandísimo programa y un grandísimo descubrimiento. Recordaos, el libro está gratuito. He pasado el enlace en el chat al principio. Lo podéis descargar. Y dicho lo cual, después de casi 3 horas de programa, solo agradeceros que me hayáis acompañado y un saludo y nos vemos en la semana que viene con más contenido. Yo creo que relajado de Inside X y haremos yo creo que un par de debates seguro. Pero bueno, seguro que también cae algún Inside X de algo que me apetece, que hay un par ahí que me pasaron en el Discord los enlaces que me parecen interesantísimos. Un abrazo, amigos. Nos vemos la semana que viene. Disfrutad de lo que queda.